Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Respectable Rektor Hidayatullah State Islamic University Jakarta, Profesor Dr. Hajah Amanil Lubis MA, the Honorable Dean of Usuluddin Faculty, Dr. Yusuf Rahman MA, the Honorable or guest speakers today, and my beloved participants who have attended in the virtual room. Good morning, everybody. First of all, let us pray and praise to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Because of His grace and mercy, we can come together without any obstacle here with healthy condition in the virtual room. Second, let us greet and pray to our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who had brought us to the path of light and left the darkness in this life. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Miftah Ramawati, and it is precious chance for me to be your master of ceremony in this morning on Thursday, 9th of August 2022 in our big event, International Conference on Quran and Hadith Studies, New Landscape on Quran and Hadith Studies, Challenges and Opportunities. On this special morning, we have several agenda as follows. First, opening. Second, recitation Holy Quran. Third, sing Indonesia Raya National Anthem. Fourth, welcoming speech from Chairman of the Committee. 5. Opening remarks from Dean of Usuluddin Faculty. The last, pray. Ladies and gentlemen, let's open this event by saying Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now, we invite Mr. Dasrizal MES to reciting Holy Quran. To Mr. Dasrizal MES, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا يفسح الله لكم وإذا قيل انشزوا فانشزوا وإذا قيل انشزوا فانشزوا يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات والله بما تعملون خبير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. خلق الإنسان من علق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. صدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sadaqallahul Azim. Thank you to Mr. Desrizal who has recited Holy Quran. May Allah bless us. Amin. The next agenda sing national anthem Indonesia Raya. The audience, please stand up. audience, please sit down. The next agenda is welcome speech from the Chairman Committee to Mr. Dr. Humaydi STHI, MUD. Time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies from Professor Dr. Haja Amani Lubis MA, Rector of UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Excellency Dr. Yusuf Rahman MA, Dean of Usuluddin Faculty, Honorable Speakers, Lecturers, Presenter, and all participants of the 4th International Conference on Quran and Hadith Studies. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wasallim. A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Alif lam mim. Dzalikal kitabu la raiba fi hudal lil muttaqin alladzina yu'minuna bil ghaib wa yuqimuna sholata wa mimma razaqnahum yunfikun. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. First of all, let's pray and sing thank to God Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us mercy and blessing, so we can attend this conference in good condition and healthy. Secondly, may peace and salutation always be given to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last messenger, the perfect man who guide us from stupidity to enlighten, from darkness to enlightenment through Islam. Dear brothers and sisters, as we know that Al-Quran is God's word, God's revelation, not merely the word of Muhammad and creation of him. As Muslim, we believe it, we agree on it, we make it as guide for our life in this world and hereafter. Yes, of course, not only Al-Quran as guide of our life, but also the word, the confession, the agreement and action, as usually we call as Hadith, also as sources of our life. But how is for empirism, philosophy of empirism, for example? How is for scientism? How is for atheism or agnosticism? They only believe that exists is physical object. There is no another is exists. The life, afterlife, or hereafter is not believing us exist. Also, God recognized as is not physical object. So God also is not exist. This is paradigm of a modern philosophy, modern scientism. This problem, I call this one of the problem today. This problem is getting more momentum with the amazing technological development. By technology, we can get information, explanation of the thing. Even sometimes we get the truth from technology. So we need not anymore to revert to Quran or Hadith to get a meaning of our life. Yes, of course, this is based on scientism paradigm. But today we want to list. We not want to list the problem. We invite with this conference by the main topic new landscape of Quran and Hadith studies. We want to answer the problem. We want to get new approaches and method in order to Quran and Hadith is always appropriate in any time in place. Because why? We invited professor and expert speakers from abroad and within the country. The first is Professor Dr. Abdul Majid Hakimullah from Al-Mustafa International University, Iran. The second is Adis Dudireja. He is with us in Zoom meeting from Griffith University, Australia. Professor Hamidullah Marazi from Islamic University of Science and Technology, Awantipora, Jammu Kashmir, India. Professor Monem Siri from Notre Dame University, USA. Dr. Muhammad Zulfahmi Muhammad from USAS, Malaysia University, Sultan Azlan Shah, Malaysia. And also we invite from Indonesia, Dr. Lili Umi Kalsum, Lisbah Santosa Aisyah MA, Saadatul Janda MA, and also Abdul Hakim Wahid MA. Besides that, this conference also followed by 41 chosen presenters who will present their paper in parallel session today and tomorrow. Actually, we organizing committee received nearly 100 articles. But after going through the selection process, we set only 41. Ladies and gentlemen, the last, I want to say thank to all members of organizing committee, master of ceremony, moderator, host, reviewer, and our leader, of course, and chairman, dean, and vice dean, and also our lecturer in Usuluddin faculty. Without them, this conference is impossible to do. We also inform that this conference supported by journal publication like journal Ilmu Usuluddin, Usuluna, Refleksi, and also Aturas, Fakultas Adab and Humaniora, Mumtaz from PTIK, Tanzil from Stai Sadra. Thank you very much. I close my speak. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. say thank you for Mr. Humaydi as Chairman Committee. The next agenda is opening remarks will be delivered by Dean of Usuluddin Faculty to Mr. Dr. Yusuf Rahman MA. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable Rector of Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, and Dean of Faculty of Syariah and Law, UIN Sharif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Professor Dr. Ahmad Talabi. Thank you for coming in this international conference. Vice Dean of Usuluddin Faculty, Head of the Department, lecturers, and student of Usuluddin Faculty, and all participants, especially our invited speakers from Malaysia, from Jammu Kashmir, from Griffith University, and also from United States, who have responded our invitation to present their paper in this international conference. And also, I would like to thank our moderator who agreed to moderate our international conference today and tomorrow, the one who has attended. I see that our brother from UIN Bandung, Mr. Acep Muslim, thank you for coming and for accepting our invitation to be a moderator. And for all the participants of this conference, the International Conference on Quran and Hadith Studies, ICONQUHAS the 4th. Yeah, we have held this international conference actually more than 4 times. Previously, the name is without ICON, without international conference. Previously, it's only named Annual Meeting of Quran and Hadith Studies, organized by the Association Quran and Hadith Academic Studies, yeah, QUHAS. But then it has been transformed into international conference, and we have this for the 4th conference. The theme of this international conference is a new landscape on Quran and Hadith studies, challenges and opportunities. As we know that the advanced development of information and technology has changed many things in the life of Muslim societies, starting from the changes in the media, documentation from paper to digital, from wired remote communication to wireless, and etc., etc. As a consequence, this advancement of technology has not only changed the way we think and the way we work, but it also created a new landscape, and including the new landscape in the studies of Quran and Hadith. And that is why in this international conference, we will discuss what are these new landscape of the research and studies in Quran and Hadith. And that is why we invite speakers from Indonesia and from abroad to enlighten us this new landscape in terms of methodology, in terms of the team, in terms of the issues and also of the approaches. Therefore, we hope that our speakers, our invited speakers, will enlighten us in this issue. So I would like to thank all the speakers for today's conference. We have the ICONQUHAS will be held in 2 days. Today, the discussion especially on Hadith, and tomorrow the discussion on Quranic studies. In addition to the panel where we invite speakers, we also have parallel session. So the parallel session will be held at 1 p.m. and we hope all the participants will also participate in this parallel session. And for sure, we hope that all the papers after the presentation and after the revision will be published in our journal. As mentioned by the head of the committee, we have in Faculty of Usuluddin, we have the journal on Ilmu Usuluddin, accredited Sinta 2, second, and then we have Refleksi Sinta 3. We have also Quran and Hadith studies Sinta 3, and we have also Usuluna Sinta 4. In addition to other journal that we have cooperated for this conference. As knowledge for you, this QUHAS, Quran and Hadith Studies, we held annually international conference. We also publish a journal called Quran and Hadith Studies. So that's why we hope that from this conference, we will have papers that will be published in this international conference. Finally, I would like to thank all the speakers, all the participants, for sure the committee who have worked very hard to have this international conference held today and tomorrow. Akhirul kalam, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. Okay. Thank you to Mr. Dr. Yusuf Rahman as Dean of Usuluddin Faculty. The last agenda is pray. Then the prayer, Mr. Dr. Haji Hassani Ahmad Said, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma lakal hamdu syukra wa lakal mannu fadla wa anta rabbuna haqqa wa nahnu abiduka riqqa wa anta lam tazal lidhalika ahla. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammadin al-fatih lima ughliqa wal khatim lima sabaqa ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم يا ميسر كل عسير ويا جابر كل كسير ويا صاحب كل فريد ويا مغني كل فقير ويا مقوي كل ضعيف ويا مأمن كل مخيف يسر علينا كل عسير فتيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير حاجاتنا إليك كثير وأنت عالم بها وبصير. اللهم إني أخاف منك وأخاف ممن يخاف منك وأخاف ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق من يخاف منك نجني ممن لا يخاف منك بحرمة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أحرسني بعينك التي لا تنام واكفني بكنافك الذي لا يرام وارحمني بقدرتك على فلا تهلكني وأنت رجائي برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين. اللهم زدنا علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا ورزقا حلالا طيبا واسعا مباركا وشفاء من كل داء وسقم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار بفضلك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Mr. Dr. Haji Hassani Ahmad Said as prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come into the main point, that is International Conference on Quran and Hadith Studies, and the theme is New Landscape on Quran and Hadith Studies, Challenges and Opportunities, which will be delivered by Mr. Ajab Muslim Esos MGMC as moderator, and me as the master of ceremony. If in guiding this event I made mistake or offend someone here, please forgive me. To Mr. Ajab Muslim, time and place are welcome.
Thank you, Ibu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Allahumma shalli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, conference committees, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar session of the 4th International Conference on Quran and Hadith Studies, or ICONQUHAS, with the theme New Landscape of Quran and Hadith Studies, Challenges and Opportunities. My name is Ajab Muslim, and I'm very honored, Bapak Ketua Conference and Bapak Dekan, to be the moderator in this webinar session. So it's really an honor for me. In today's webinar, we are going to talk about new challenges and opportunities in the study of Quran and Hadith study, especially in relation to the new emerging landscape created by current social and technological transformation. As we have witnessed, technological transformation, including digital technologies, has not only changed the way we do our daily activities, such as how we do teaching, how we do research, but it has also created new social and academic landscape. These changes occur in many academic fields. It's not only in the field of technology, in the field of social science broadly, but also in the field of Quran and Hadith study. Currently, researchers of Quran and Hadith studies face a number of phenomena and challenges that demand serious attention. These new challenges, this new landscape not only has potential to raise new inspiration in the field of the study, but it has also potential to generate new field of study, new field of research, such as the construction of methodology for studying the Quran and Hadith study. As mentioned by Bapak Dekan in his remark, today's conference will focus mainly on the Hadith studies, how this new landscape influenced by technological transformation also posed new challenges for scholars in the field of Hadith studies. To discuss those exciting topics, we have invited 4 special speakers today that have advanced expertise in the study of Quran and Hadith studies, especially in Hadith studies and broadly in Islamic studies. And without further ado, let me introduce those four speakers. I'd like to invite and introduce to all participants here. The first speaker is Dr. Adis Duderija. Hello, Dr. Adis Duderija. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, Dr. Adis. Okay. Thank you for joining with us. So you are now in Brisbane. Correct me if I'm wrong. So it's about 12:30 p.m. in Brisbane, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. So good afternoon for you. So Dr. Adis Dudereja is a senior lecturer in the study of Islam and society at Griffith University, Brisbane, Australia. He is one of the internationally most recognized scholars in the field of contemporary Islamic studies, especially in relation to his work on gender and Islam, the theory of progressive Islam, and the Islamic interpretive tradition more generally, with specific focus on Sunnah and Hadith. In addition to over 50 journal articles, book chapters, and encyclopedia entries, Dr. Duderija is author and editor of over half a dozen books, including I just mentioned, you've read a lot of books. Two books that I mentioned here, Islam and Gender, Major Issues and Debates, and Islam and Muslim in the West, Major Issues and Debates. In addition, he also serves on the editorial board of several academic journals, and his scholarship has been translated into Arabic, Indonesian, Urdu, and Hindi. So in today's webinar, Dr. Adis will talk about approaches to Hadith reform in contemporary Muslim discourse. So thank you again, Dr. Adis, for joining us in this international conference. So the second speaker, I'd like to introduce to you about the second speaker, who is Professor Dr. Abdul Majid Hakimullahi. Hello, Assalamualaikum, Professor Abdul.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you today?
Fine, alhamdulillah. I'm
Alhamdulillah. And you are now in Indonesia, are you, or in Iran?
I'm in Indonesia now.
Oh, Indonesia, alhamdulillah.
Yes.
So,
I arrived here last week.
Thank you so much for joining us in this conference, Professor Abdul. So Professor Abdul is the Vice President, Relation and International Affairs at Al Mustafa International University in Iran, and in which he also teaches some special subjects such as Arabic literature, logic, principle of jurisprudence, and philosophy. And Professor Abdul Majid has rich professional experiences as academics in not only in Iran, but also in some more countries, such as lecturer at the Islamic University of Ghana and Islamic College in London. In addition, he has a wide range of academic works, including, among others, methodology in history, Islamic mysticism, Islamic thought, and Quranic proof for the existence of God. So today, Professor Abdul will talk about new breakthrough in Quran and Hadith experience of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So Professor Abdul, thank you again for joining with us this morning in this very special event. And then I'd like to introduce you to the third speaker in today's conference. The third speaker is Ibu Lisfa Sentosa Aisyah SAG MA. Ibu Lisfa, selamat pagi Ibu. Halo Ibu, can you hear my voice?
Selamat pagi, Mr. Asep.
Selamat pagi, good morning Ibu. Apa kabar Ibu? Sehat Ibu?
Alhamdulillah, sehat.
Alhamdulillah. So thank you Ibu for joining with us. Ibu Lisfa is lecturer at the Faculty of Usuluddin, State Islamic University, Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta. She particularly has expertise in Takhrij method, Rijalul Hadith, method in understanding Hadith, and Ulumul Hadith. Ibu Lisfa has written a number of academic works, book, and journal, including a book I mentioned here, Konstruksi Pemikiran Hadis Imam Malik, and another work. She also just published an academic work about analysis prokes dan kesiapan Majelis Ta'lim di Ciputat during the COVID-19. So in today's webinar, Ibu Lisfa will talk about a very interesting topic that is about digitalisasi hadis, tinjauan atas aplikasi hadis di era modern or the digitalization of hadis, a review on hadis application in modern era. So thank you, terima kasih banyak Ibu sudah bergabung bersama kita pagi ini. Dan pembicara yang keempat, the last but not least, the fourth speaker in today's conference is Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim Wahid, SHMA. Assalamualaikum, Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Aceh.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for joining with us, Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim. So, Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim is a lecturer at the Faculty of Usuluddin, State Islamic University, Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta, in which he also serves as the editor-in-chief of Jurnal Refleksi. Bapak Dekan mentioned also about Jurnal Refleksi this morning in his remarks. Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim has written numerous academic works around the Quranic and Hadith studies, such as The Authenticity of Hadith, narrated by Nafi the Maula of Ibnu Umar, Peta Perdebatan Akademik dalam Kajian Hadis, Pemahaman Jamaah Tabligh terhadap ayat-ayat dakwah dan implikasinya terhadap konsep huruj dan jaulah, and metode Mahir, modul pembelajaran Mahir membaca Al-Quran dalam 40 hari. In this webinar, in this special morning, Bapak Dr. Abdul Majid will talk about paradigma baru teori common link dalam kajian hadis kontemporer, or new paradigm in common link theory in the study of contemporary hadis. So thank you, Bapak Dr. Abdul Majid, for joining us in this conference. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the first speakers, let me inform you some or a few rules in this webinar. So first, we have in total about 3 hours, or about 3 hours basically in this webinar. So each speaker will talk for about 30 minutes, that's quite long. So each speakers, I believe, can elaborate a bit more about the topic that they want to talk in this conference. And after that, we will have question and answer session and discussion session. And for our participant, is during the talk, so you don't need actually to wait until the speakers finish the talk. If during the talk you have any idea pop up in your mind, you have a question, then you can just directly write down in the chat box. So you can write your question, but don't forget to also write your name and also write your institution and direct your question to at least one of the speakers. Of course, you can ask to more than one speakers, but at least you have to one specific speaker in this session. Otherwise, you can also wait until all speakers completed the talk and you can raise your hand and directly ask your question to the speakers. Also, I need to inform you that the speakers will talk in following order. So first will be Dr. Adis, followed by Dr. Abdul Majid, Professor Abdul Majid, and then Ibu Lisfa, and then Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim. Sorry if I wrongly mistake your name, sir. So, all right, without further ado, I will give the first opportunity to talk to Dr. Adis Tuderija. Dr. Adis? So, Dr. Adis, you have 30 minutes to talk, and the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to first of all thank the organizing committee for inviting me to be part of this really interesting conference. Especially, I would like to thank the Dean of UIN Usuluddin faculty, Pak Yusuf Rahman. I remember I have fond memories over some, I think 10, 11 years ago, I was able to be a guest of the University of UIN. That was very early on in my academic career, and I really appreciate the support Pak Yusuf Rahman has given me at that time and continues to mentor me and give me and support me in my various academic projects. So I'm very, very happy to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about I'm going to try and before we can understand perhaps what is ahead of us for in terms of the future of Hadith scholarship, it is good to understand the contemporary context and the situation. What kind of different approaches exist in relation to dealing with the Hadith? And so I will provide a brief overview of what I call the 5 approaches. I'm just trying to share my screen. If I can find the correct, here we go. So what I would like to do is discuss what I consider to be 5 major approaches to dealing with the questions pertaining to Hadith authenticity and how Hadith should be interpreted. And then focus a little bit more on what I consider to be a very exciting development in the field, namely what I call contextualist progressive approaches to Hadith reform. And in particular, I would like to focus on the scholarship of one scholar who comes from within that contextualist progressive tradition or approach by the name of Professor Sadia Sheikh, who is a Muslim academic scholar at the University of Cape Town. Hopefully what I have to say will be informative, and probably for many of you, you know most of this information, but I thought that it would be useful for us to understand that the contemporary field in Hadith scholarship is very vibrant, that there are many interesting approaches, many important approaches. So I'm not saying that the contextualist progressive approach is the best or the one that everybody should adopt, but it is certainly one of the approaches that we need to take seriously and also try to understand the overall landscape and how these different paradigms and approaches function and how do they relate to each other. So the overview and the main aim is I will try to explain the main arguments and methodologies that underpin the 5 main approaches. And then I will spend hopefully just a little bit more time talking about the contextualist progressive approach. This is where my strength is. I have written a lot on contextualist and progressive approaches. So this is my strength. I do not have, actually, I do not have very strong training in classical approaches. So it goes along together with my approach, with my strength. So the first approach that I call that the first approach, reform within mainstream traditionalism. So when we look at different approaches to the Hadith, ulum al-Hadith in general, one of the most representative and the main approaches that has the very long historical pedigree is that the one that's associated with the mainstream madhahib, both in primarily I'm here focusing on the Sunni tradition. So the first approach that is important for us to keep in mind is that of the madhab-based approach that's associated with the institutional taqlid and the classical usul al-fiqh. Basically, when we look at the scholars who come from within this tradition, and I have provided us with some examples of the scholars who we could put into this category. When we look at how they approach the Hadith, basically what we can see from their writings, especially in terms of their methodology, and I'm here very much interested in methodology, is that they tend to, in their writings, they tend to emphasize the centrality of the Quran when interpreting the Hadith. They try to increase the scope of reason also. So when they're writing on Islamic legal theory, theology, and jurisprudence, they tend to place an emphasis on reason and the Quran, and less so on the Hadith when discussing, for example, usul al-fiqh or issues pertaining to Islamic theology and jurisprudence. Also, some of these scholars have employed the insights from Maqasid al-Sharia and applied them to the interpretation of Hadith. But their approach to Maqasid al-Sharia, it's very important for us to emphasize, also is situated or embedded within the mainstream classical usul al-fiqh theory. Yeah. So when we look at the methodology, essentially, we can see that the scholars who operate within this tradition, they try to narrow the scope and the importance of Hadith as sources of Islamic norms and values. And it is important for me to establish and emphasize the fact that when we examine their writings, we see that they are operating very, very strongly within the existing paradigms, methodological frameworks, epistemological frameworks that have already been established in classical Islamic thought. Yeah. So they do not bring in any, let's say, new methodological or epistemological tools, as I will argue contextualist progressive Muslim approaches do. So they operate within that classical hermeneutical, epistemological, methodological paradigm. So I have included some of the major representatives of this approach in contemporary. So the Gumari brothers from Morocco, the Egyptians, Muhammad al-Ghazali, Yusuf al-Qardawi. Then in Turkey, we have Mehmet Görmez, who was, he used to be the president of Diyanet, the Turkish religious, the official government-based religious affairs, the director of the religious affairs in Turkey, and Israr Ahmed Khan, who comes from the Indian subcontinent. So often what's important for me to highlight is that when we look at Islamic interpretative tradition on any issue, and this also applies equally to ulum al-hadith, often we find that many of the issues that are being discussed and debated are done in a somewhat, let's say, polemical and dialogical manner. So often when these scholars who are writing from within this mainstream tradition, when they discuss hadith interpretation, they often write in response to criticism that they have been exposed to or from other approaches. So in the case of the mainstream traditionalists, we often see that when they are writing on the issues pertaining to hadith interpretation and reform, often they are their works should be evaluated as a response to criticisms coming from other approaches, especially in this case what I call the neo-Ahl al-Hadith or Salafi approaches and the liberal approaches. Yeah. Which brings me to the second trend or second type of discourse that exists to hadith interpretation. And that is what I call reform within non-mainstream traditionalism. Yeah. So here I refer to, what I mean by this is basically scholars who are associated with the Salafi or neo-Ahl al-Hadith or Hanbali approach, if we could use that term. So unlike the first approach, the scholars who are associated with the non-mainstream traditionalism, some of the delineating features, as we all know, they rejected the taqlid usul al-fiqh paradigm. Yeah. They also reject this idea of that there is a consensus of scholars, of the madhahib-based scholars, on the consensus of the authenticity of the canonized hadith literature. Yeah, and they tend to, when we look at the methodology or the manhaj, it is strongly associated with the Ahl Hadith approach that we have from the pre-modern Islamic tradition. Yeah. So one example in contemporary Islam is the Ahl Hadith movement in South Asia, where this kind of approach is quite evident, and of course in Saudi, some Saudi Arabian scholars as well, arguably could be placed into this category, depending upon whether or not there are some disagreements whether or not Hanbalis really should be referred to as Salafis, and but I guess this is to some extent a generalization. So a major representative of this approach is the famous Al-Albani, who very much rejected this idea that, you know, that we find in the taqlidi-based tradition, that the canonized, the Al-Kutub al-Sitta should not be you know, questioned, that the authenticity should not be questioned. So his lifelong project was to actually look at these books critically and to unearth or find the da'if hadith, and which is what he has done in basically in his writings. It seems as if that although he was not a rationalist, scholars who have looked at Al-Albani's work have said that he was influenced by more rationalist-minded scholars like Abdu, and therefore that was one of the reasons why he embarked on this project of trying to re-examine the canonized Sunni hadith, rather than considering them as beyond kind of as being fully canonical. So, but as Professor Jonathan Brown, who has written on this topic comprehensively, when we look at the methodology of Al-Albani, basically we can say that he very much follows what we would call the historical ilm al-rijal sciences when it comes to hadith criticism. So he also does not introduce really any new methodological tools into this field of inquiry. Yeah, and as I mentioned previously, these scholars often engage in polemical debates, and the main target of criticism are scholars who belong to the mainstream taqlidi paradigm. So as you all know, we have many polemical works that have been written in response to Albani's work, and Albani reacting to these criticisms, famously Ramadan al-Butti and other scholars. So again, this is the second approach that I would consider as being very significant in trying to understand the contemporary landscape in relation to understanding ulum al-hadith. The next approach I call the Sunnah Hadith distinction approach. Okay, and what I mean by that is that we have a school of thought in contemporary Muslim Islamic discourses that insist on drawing a strong conceptual distinction between the concept of Sunnah and the concept of Hadith. Yeah, and scholars who are associated with this approach, such as Fazlur Rahman, Shahrur, Islahi and Ghamidi, scholars from the Indian subcontinent, they often make a point that their approach also has historical precedence in early Hanafi and Maliki school of thought. So basically, they have argued that during the formative period of Islam, during the first 3 to 4 generations, the approach to the concept of Sunnah was quite distinct to how it later developed in classical Islamic scholarship and ulum al-hadith. Yeah, so basically, they are trying to say that their approach is more aligned with the formative period of Islam, where the concept of Sunnah was not methodologically or epistemologically dependent upon the concept of a Sahih Hadith. Yeah. So they have introduced some important epistemological and methodological tools to substantiate their argument. Yeah, they have argued, for example, that epistemologically the concept of Sunnah is much more robust compared to the kind of the epistemological foundations of hadith that we get from the hadith books, because the concept of Sunnah, for example, does not depend upon the transmission of texts or of either oral texts or written texts, but that it is a perpetually transmitted practice, tawatur amali, of the entire Muslim community, and therefore is less susceptible to let's say, distortions and inaccuracies. Yeah. Unlike the first two approaches, this approach also does not consider Sunnah or Hadith to be able to abrogate the Quran. Yeah. And it restricts the concept of Sunnah to religious laws only and not to Muslim beliefs or history. Yeah. So the scope of the concept of Sunnah, or the nature of the concept of Sunnah, could only have implications in terms of Muslim religious laws, but not theology, and so not Aqidah. Yeah. This school of thought basically not only emphasizes the importance of the Quran and reason in interpreting the Hadith, but also the idea of the Sunnah Mutawatira that I mentioned earlier on. It also argues that Hadith must be interpreted thematically, holistically, and to some extent contextually. But also they emphasize that the Sunnah has to be that any Hadith, regardless whether it is Sahih or not, if it goes against the overall human nature, customs and conventions, fitrah and ma'aruf, then it should not be accepted as having any normative values. Or all right. So there's actually more to say about this, but I'm running out of time. But this hopefully paints a reasonably accurate picture of this school of thought. The next approach is the so-called Quran-only approach. So in this approach, hadith essentially are seen as not having any normative value. They are completely abandoned. They do not serve as sources, as normative sources of Islamic thought at all, in any aspect, religious, legal, political, or social. By their opponents, they are often referred to as the deniers of hadith. Whether or not there is a valid claim or not, of course, this is more polemical, yeah, rather than scholarly. So when we look at where we find this school of thought in contemporary discourses, usually they refer to themselves as Ahli Quran, and we find that they are most significantly represented in some parts of India and Egypt. Yeah. What's important for me to emphasize is that Ahl Quran scholars are not necessarily modernist, But like their opponents or the kind of the people that they engage in polemics most with, the Ahl Hadith group, they tend to be very scripturalist in their orientation. Yeah. So here you can see I have provided you with certain scholarly authorities who are associated with this approach. Yeah. So again, scholars from India and some scholars from Egypt. Also, it has come to my knowledge that there is perhaps some support for this approach also in parts of Malaysia among some intellectuals, not necessarily scholars in Hadith studies, but more public intellectuals. Yeah. So the final approach that I would like to talk about, and I would want to talk about them in a little bit more detail, because I believe they offer some new insights, new approaches, and also because I am most familiar with them, and I have tried to contribute myself to this kind of approach, is what I call the contextualist progressive approach. This approach, as I have written elsewhere, is associated with Muslim scholars, with progressive Muslim scholars. One of them is the Indonesian Muslim scholar, Hadith scholar, that I'm sure is very familiar to Indonesian audiences, Dr. Abdul Qadir Faqihuddin. Professor Sadia Sheikh, whom I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, Professor Khalid Abul Fadl, who is now based in the United States, but he's originally from Egypt and grew up in Qatar, if I'm not mistaken. Myself, and then there is some other Muslim scholars, female scholars, such as the Iranian scholar Nimed Barazangi. So this is probably the most recent approach or trend when it comes to Hadith, questions pertaining to Hadith interpretation, Hadith hermeneutics. And probably alongside the Sunnah Hadith distinction approach, which is the approach number 3, it probably has the most innovative approaches, methodological and epistemological approaches when it comes to interpretation of Hadith. Yeah. Probably one of its most important delineating features and characteristics is that it emphasizes the role of historical context in the conceptualization and interpretation, not only of the Hadith, but also the Quran. Yeah, that they have a strongly contextualist character, especially when it comes to trying to understand the socio-legal dimensions of these scriptural sources. So that's why, for example, if we look at Abdul Qadir's approach to Hadith, basically, he not only looks at the isnad of the Hadith when evaluating it critically, but he approaches Hadith as having, as I said, a strongly contextualist character. And he looks at, for example, he views the Hadith through a contextualist lens, through a socio-culturalist lens, arguing that they are often should be seen as products of a particular socio-cultural reality. Yeah, and that we need to take that socio-cultural reality into consideration when trying to ask the question, what kind of messages or potentially normative values these hadith could have for us and for Islamic law and ethics in particular. Professor Khalid Abul Fadl has mounted a very strong epistemological critique of the hadith, arguing that the classical hadith epistemology when seen from the contemporary perspective of contemporary epistemology, is largely untenable because it's based upon, what I would call naive realism. It is not aware of, for example, advancements in conceptual history, contemporary epistemology, literary theory. So he has mounted a very strong epistemological critique of the Hadith, arguing that Hadith can provide important information to us, but that this information should be approached with a lot of caution and with a critical eye, especially if the Hadith that are being used or being looked at as potential normative sources, especially if they have wide-ranging implications. Those Hadith that, for example, deal with Islamic ethics or Islamic law, they need to be scrutinized very, very, very carefully. And apart from an epistemological critique, Professor Khalid Abou Fadl, and I didn't write this here, also has included novel and innovative, what I would call an ethical lens through which one must employ before accepting the potential normative value of many hadith, and especially those hadith, for example, that portray women in derogatory or humiliating ways that are contrary to the broader Quranic and Sunnah-based principles of human dignity and equality. Yeah. Professor Barazangi, the Iranian Muslim scholar, has also given us an important novel methodological tool to separate, to help us deal with interpretation of hadith. She talks about the distinction between hadith, authenticating hadith, and validating hadith. She says that, yes, we can rely on classical ulum al-hadith to authenticate the hadith, but even if once we have authenticated the hadith, that's the only start of the journey. That's only the first step. We need to employ additional methodological criteria before we can accept them as having validity. Yeah, and she talks about the need for Muslims today to rediscover an authentic theology of Sunnah that, according to her, has been lost, especially when we want to understand issues pertaining to gender relations.
Iya. Sudah di kampus.
I'm not sure how much time do I have left.
No.
You still have about
Jadwal.
5 minutes, Dr.
5 minutes. Okay.
Yes, please.
Good. I'm nearly there. So one exciting scholar that I think operates within the contextualist progressive paradigm is Professor Sadia Sheikh. And what I really think is the strength of her approach is that she not only uses the classical hadith scholarship that is similar to that of, let's say, Faqihuddin Abdul Qadir, but she also uses, for example, the hermeneutics of suspicion and feminist hermeneutics and feminist theology, and she applies these bodies of knowledge when interpreting hadith, especially those hadith that pertain to gender relations. And of course, she also, and I might have omitted this in my presentation, she also relies on the Islamic Tasawwuf heritage, especially in the writings of Ibn al-Arabi, and the idea of a gender egalitarian religious anthropology, according to which essentially the basic Islamic message is that there can be no discrimination on the basis of gender when it comes to Islamic ethics, laws, and theology. Yeah, and that we already have precedents in the Islamic tradition, especially in the Sufi tradition of Ibn al-Arabi, who has already developed some 600 years ago a gender egalitarian religious anthropology that can be used to interpret the hadith in a gender egalitarian manner. So basically what she's trying to argue is that it is possible to interpret hadith both in a patriarchal perspective, but also if we employ certain hermeneutical mechanisms, such as those associated with Sufi tradition, and especially if it is supplemented by scholarship coming out of feminist theology, feminist hermeneutics, then it is possible to interpret many hadith that on the surface level, one could argue that they advocate for a patriarchal or androcentric kinds of values. If they are examined through this lens of hermeneutics of suspicion and feminist theology, alongside this idea of a gender egalitarian religious anthropology that we find, for example, in the scholarship and the ideas of Ibn al-Arabi, it is actually equally possible to interpret these hadith to buttress or to promote a gender egalitarian paradigm. All right, so let me conclude by saying that the contemporary landscape in hadith studies is very vibrant and very exciting. We have, I have identified about 5 different approaches that exist in relation to hadith interpretation. And I have tried to focus a little bit on the contextualist progressive approach because I believe that is the most exciting and the most fruitful in terms of helping Muslim societies with many ethical problems or many ethical conundrums and difficulties that they are facing, especially in relation to gender issues, but also beyond, and that this contemporary contextualist progressive approach can be used to interpret hadith in such a way that will help Muslim societies to progress and align themselves with contemporary developments in ethics, and still be faithful to their religious tradition. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adis, for such a rich explanation. So if I can make a highlight in Dr. Adis' presentation, so he introduced us with, particularly he actually emphasized the contextualist and progressive approach in studying hadith, but he also in the beginning introduced us with 4 tradition in studying hadith, including reform within the mainstream tradition, and then the non-traditionalism, and then Sunnah and Hadith distinction, and Quran only approach. Then he talked and shared with us a lot about contextualist progressive approach, with one of the strong characteristic is strong contextualist character. And the last sentence from Dr. Adis, I think is very strong, that this approach will help to Muslim societies to progress and align themselves with the contemporary ethic of the contemporary world, without by still faithful to our religion. So thank you again, Dr. Adis, for the explanation. So just to remind you, to all participants, if you have any question, you can write the question on the chat box. Jadi jika ada pertanyaan, mungkin kalau terutama for Dr. Adis, in case that you forget, if you wait till the next 1 hour, so you can just write down your question on the chat box. and then just put your name and the institution. For those of you who just joined with our conference, so welcome. We've just completed the first speaker, Dr. Adis, and now we move to the next speaker, Professor Dr. Abdul Majid. Are you with us?
Yes.
So, Professor Abdul, you have 30 minutes, and the time is yours.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Actually, first of all, I would like to congratulate all of you in the occasion of independence of 77 of Indonesia. And also, it is a pleasure for me to be here, and I would like to extend my thankfulness to all of you, especially the Dean of Faculties and other professors, lecturers, for inviting us to join this interesting program and webinar. I was informed that I have to deliver my papers in Arabic language, and I prepared in Arabic language. So I will speak in the beginning about advantages of and achievement of the Quran and Hadith, new achievements and approaches in the Quran and Hadith in the 3 sections. First of all, in the research, and the second in the teaching, and in the end, I will raise some new approaches and new idea concerning the tafsir and hadith. So in the beginning, I'm going to talk about these 3 sections, which in the Islamic Republic of Iran, we started and we have a lot of achievement, and we created a lot of approaches towards understanding the Holy Quran and Hadith. So let me, because I was informed it's better, I will speak in Arabic. أقام الجمهورية الإسلامية الإيرانية فيما يتعلق بالدراسات بين التخصصات للقرآن والعلوم الإسلامية. In this field, interdisciplinary between the العلوم القرآنية, Quranic sciences, and human sciences. There are 3 major sections, and which المحور الأول البحوث والدراسات في بين التخصصات interdisciplinary مثل التفسير وإنتاج كتب والمجلات وإقامة المؤتمرات. القسم الثاني قسم التعليم مثل إنشاء دورات للدكتوراه على مرحلة دكتوراه في علوم القرآن والحديث. والقسم الثالث والمحور الثالث الذي أنا سوف أتحدث عن الآراء والنظريات الجديدة في العلوم القرآنية والدراسات القرآنية والحديثة، سواء كان في الدراسات القرآنية مثل التفسير الموضوعي أو الدراسات في إعجاز القرآن، أو النظريات ذات الصلة بالقرآن الكريم مثل نظرية الباطن، نظرية النسخ وما شابه ذلك. أما بما أننا سوف نتحدث عن بين التخصصات interdisciplinary، ففي interdisciplinary هناك 5 محاور التي يجب أن نتحدث عنها. المحور الأول الموضوع بين التخصصات، مثلا الشمس، فنحن نأخذ الشمس من علم النجوم، من علم الأسترونومي، ثم ندرس العلوم القرآنية التفاسير والآيات القرآنية حول هذا الموضوع، أو علوم الكونيات أو خلق الإنسان من منظور القرآن وعلم الأحياء. المحور الثاني في بين التخصصات التعاون العلمي بين التخصصات. مثلا إذا نحن نريد أن نعرف تأثير الحجاب، تأثير الصلاة على الصحة النفسية، فنحن لابد أن نتعاون وننسق مع علم النفس. وأيضا إذا نريد أن نعرف الكهف في قصة أصحاب الكهف، فنحن لابد أن نراجع علماء الأثر، يعني القضايا الأثرية وعلماء الآثار، أو سفينة نوح، حيث يتطلب التعاون والتنسيق مع علماء في علم النفس أو في علم الأثر أو في علم الأفلاك والنجوم والأسترونومي. القسم المحور الثالث في بين التخصصات المنهج. أحيانا نحن لابد أن نستفيد من مناهج العلوم الإنسانية لفهم الدقيق في التفاسير والعلوم القرآنية، حيث مثلا إذا نريد أن نعرف تأثير تلاوة القرآن على السلامة والصحة النفسية، وكذلك تخفيف آلام المرضى بالإضافة إلى التعاون بين التخصصات. طبعا نحن نحتاج إلى منهج بحث بين التخصصات حتى تتمكن الأساليب التقليدية في علم النفس والطب من خلال الجمع بين طرق تلاوة القرآن. المحور الثالث أو الرابع البحث في علوم التخصصات، وهو قابل للتطبيق في مجال التفاسير المتخصصة للقرآن، مثل التفسير التربوي، التفسير الاقتصادي، التفسير السياسي، التفسير الطبي، التفسير الفلكي، التفسير التاريخي، التفسير الحقوقي أو القانوني، التفسير الإداري، التفسير الاجتماعي، التفسير النفسي وما إلى ذلك. نعم، الآن نأتي إلى محاور تطوير الدراسات بين التخصصات للعلوم القرآنية والعلوم الحديثية في إيران. فالمحور الأول الذي نريد أن نتحدث عن محور التفاسير بين التخصصات. هناك تفاسير عندنا نحن جئنا به، وهذا يعني الآراء جديدة. الأول التفسير التربوي للقرآن الكريم، حيث هذا التفسير ألف قبل تقريبا 20 سنة، والمؤلف حسين ميرزا خاني، وطبع بعض المجلدات من هذا التفسير. والمؤلف يفسر القرآن الكريم من ناحية تربوية education، من ناحية تربوية وeducation. التفسير الثاني في هذا المجال التفسير الأمثل، حيث ألف باللغة الفارسية في 27 مجلد لآية الله ناصر مكارم الشيرازي، وهو من المراجع. وهذا التفسير طبعا ترجم إلى اللغات العربية والإنجليزية والتركية والأردية، حتى ترجم إلى اللغة الإندونيسية، ولكن ما طبع بعد. هذا التفسير منظم بتوجه اجتماعي وسياسي وعلوم نفسية. التفسير الثالث الذي ألف أخيرا تفسير ضياء القرآن، 6 مجلدات، طبعا ليس كامل القرآن، 6 مجلدات، والمؤلف توفي. وهذا التفسير يناقش مواضيع العلوم الطبيعية والإنسانية، وأيضا الأمور الاجتماعية والتربوية. قسم التفسير الرابع الذي ألف أخيرا تفسير باسم التسنيم. هذا التفسير حتى الآن طبع منه 70 مجلدا، ولا أدري متى ينتهي، ولكن هذا التفسير لآية الله عبد الله جوادي آملي، وهو من الفلاسفة، كتب هذا التفسير بمنهج القرآن، تفسير القرآن بالقرآن، وبنهج صوفي عرفاني فلسفي. هو متخصص في علم الفلسفة والتصوف، ففسر القرآن الكريم على منهج تفسير القرآن بالقرآن، وهناك نظريات جديدة في هذا التفسير. سوف إن شاء الله في نهاية البحث نتطرق إلى بعض الأبحاث الجديدة والآراء الجديدة. والتفسير الخامس تفسير الهادي، حيث ألف هذا التفسير باللغة الفارسية 20 مجلد، ومؤلف هذا التفسير الشيخ هاشمي رفسنجاني المتوفى، طبعا توفي قبل 2 سنين، وهو كان رئيسا الجمهور الأسبق. هذا التفسير يهتم بالمواضع التعليمية التربوية والاجتماعية. والثالث تفسير النور لمحسن القراءة، هذا التفسير أيضا بتوجيه تعليمي واجتماعي وتربوي. وهناك تفسير آخر، تفسير باسم تفسير مهر، هذا التفسير تمت كتابته بتوجه تعليمي واجتماعي، ففي كل آية يتطرق إلى المواضيع المتعددة، مثلا علم الكونيات، علم الطب، علم الفلسفة، أسترونومي، وما إلى ذلك من العلوم الكونية والطبيعية والرياضية. القسم الثاني من التفاسير الذي تم تأليفه وتمت كتابته في إيران، هناك تفاسير عدة، أنا أذكر أسامي بعض هذه التفاسير، وهي تفاسير جاءت بآراء ونظريات جديدة، مثلا مثل الأول مفاهيم القرآن. هذا طبعا الأصل ألف باللغة الفارسية، والمؤلف هو بنفسه أيضا ألفه باللغة العربية، في العربية ب10 مجلدات، وترجم إلى بعض اللغات، وقد نشر بالفارسية 14 مجلد، ولكن العربية مفاهيم القرآن، وهذا بالعربية. فهذا التفسير يتم ترتيبه بالتوجه العقلي والكلامي والعلوم الإنسانية. تفسير آخر تفسير موضوعي باسم رسالة القرآن، وهذا ألف تحت إشراف آية الله مكارم الشيرازي في 10 مجلدات ضخمة، وهذا تفسير موضوعي للكون والطبيعيات والعلوم العقلية. وهناك تفسير آخر باسم تفسير الموضوعي باسم تفسير معارف القرآن، وهذا لمؤلفه آية الله مصباح اليزدي، وهو معروف وهو فيلسوف تخصصه في الفلسفة. ألف هذا التفسير في مواضيع متعددة بمنظور فلسفي وعلوم اجتماعية. المجلد الأول في معرفة الله، وأولا يتحدث عن الله تبارك وتعالى، عن صفاته وعن أفعاله. المجلد الثاني في معرفة الكونيات، الكون، العالم، خلق العالم، الظواهر الأرضية، الظواهر السماوية، يتحدث عن العرش، عن الكرسي، عن الملائكة، عن العالم، عن البحار. كل آية في القرآن الكريم تتعلق أو تتحدث عن الكونيات، هو يأخذ هذه الآية المباركة ويفسرها وأيضا العلوم الأشياء غير مرئية مثل الجن وما شابه إلى ذلك. المجلد الثالث من هذا التفسير يتحدث عن معرفة الإنسان بما في ذلك يتحدث عن خلق الإنسان، خصائص الإنسان النفسية وكرامة الإنسان، مسؤولية الإنسان، الحياة والسنن الإلهية في الحياة الفردية والاجتماعية والقيامة، وأيضا مصير النهائي للبشرية. المجلد الرابع من هذا التفسير يتحدث عن الأخلاق وعن تزكية النفس، وهناك آراء ونظريات جديدة لأنه استطاع أن يجمع بين العلوم القرآنية والتفسيرية والحديثة وبين العلوم الإنسانية. والمجلد الخامس من هذا التفسير الموضوعي في القواعد الاجتماعية للقرآن هو يتحدث عن النظم والقوانين والأسس الموجودة في القرآن الكريم للعلاقات، سواء علاقات داخلية أو العلاقات الدولية. والقسم المجلد السادس من هذا التفسير يتحدث عن الحقوق والسياسة في القرآن الكريم، ويستفيد من النظريات الجديدة في العلوم الاجتماعية. وهناك تفسير آخر، تفسير موضوعي لآية الله جواد آملي الذي هو ألف تفسير ترتيبي في 70 مجلد، وعنده أيضا تفسير موضوعي، فهو بتوجيه صوفي عرفاني وعلى منهج تفسير القرآن بالقرآن، يتحدث عن المواضيع والموضوعات المتعددة الموجودة في القرآن الكريم، ويأتي بآراء ونظريات الجديدة. هناك أيضا تفسير الموضوعي المعارف القرآنية، فهذا التفسير يتحدث عن المواضيع المختلفة وبتوجه الجديد والعلوم الجديدة التي يحتاج إليه البشر في العصر الراهن. فمثلا الكتاب الثالث، الجزء الثالث من هذا التفسير يتحدث عن أصول الأخلاق، لا يتحدث عن الأخلاق، عن المباني الأخلاقية والأسس الأخلاقية سواء في العلوم الإسلامية أو غير الإسلامية. يتحدث عن المواقف الأخلاقية، عن الآفات وعن المعوقات وعن الموانع في علم الأخلاق. والمجلد الرابع يتحدث عن أسس الاقتصاد السليم من وجهة نظر القرآن، يعني الاقتصاد الإسلامي والقضايا الاقتصادية التي أثيرت في القرآن الكريم وطرحت في القرآن الكريم. طبعا يطرح الآراء والنظريات الاقتصادية من العلوم الإنسانية ثم يطبق مع النظريات القرآنية في علم الاقتصاد. هناك تفسير آخر لتفسير الثقافة القرآنية، هذا التفسير أيضا للشيخ رفسنجاني وهو الرئيس السابق في إيران، فهو جمع هذا التفسير وفقا للحروف الأبجدية، وحتى الآن نشر من هذا التفسير 24 مجلد. تفسير آخر بس تفسير القرآن والتعليم، هذا يتحدث عن القرآن والعلوم التربوية ويصل إلى 6 مجلدات. هذا في قسم التفاسير. وهناك أيضا كتب قد ألفت أخيرا في تقريبا هذه الآونة الأخيرة أقل من 30 سنة. فأولا تم جمع عديد من الكتب والأطروحات التي تحدثت، والكتب الخاصة التي تتحدث عن الآراء والنظريات الجديدة القرآنية والحديثة. مثلا أنا أذكر بعض هذه الكتب التي نشرت وطبعت: القرآن والصحة النفسية لأحمد صادقيان، الإعجاز الطبي في القرآن الكريم، القرآن والرياضيات لسيد مرتضى علوي، المعجزات القرآنية وعجائبه العلمية، القرآن وعلوم الكونيات. وهناك مجلات عدة أيضا قد تتناول هذه المجلات الآراء الجديدة في التفسير والحديث، مثل مجلة معروفة عندنا مثل مجلة علمية نصف سنوية، في كل سنة تصدر هذه المجلة مرتين، تروج للآراء الجديدة القرآنية والحديثة. وهناك مجلة فصلية 4 مرات في السنة تطبع هذه المجلة في الأنشطة القرآنية لطلاب الجامعات و universities. وهناك مجلات أخرى تتناول موضوعات مختلفة، مجلة مثلا بالموضوع إلى تعاليم القرآن الكريم وعلوم أخرى وعلاقات العلوم القرآنية بالعلوم الأخرى، والقرآن وعلومه التجريبية، القرآن والعلوم الإنسانية كقضايا التعليم والتدريب وعلم النفس، علم الاجتماع، علم القانون، القرآن والإلهيات مثل القرآن والفقه، القضايا الفلسفية، القضايا الكونية، القضايا الطبيعية، والقضايا الأرضية والسماوية. وأيضا في هذا المحور الأول حيث البحث، هناك إقامة مؤتمرات عدة للآراء الجديدة والنظريات الجديدة حول القرآن الكريم والأحاديث الشريفة، مثل المؤتمر الدولي للعلوم القرآنية والحديثة حيث أقيمت في سنة 2016 وأيضا هذا قد طبع 38 مجلد كتاب من مقالات هذا المؤتمر، قد طبع 38 volumes of books. وأيضا بعض المقالات أيضا طبعت أخيرا في 7 مجلدات. المؤتمر الثاني الذي يهتم بالآراء الجديدة للقرآن الكريم والأحاديث هذا المعروف المؤتمر الوطني للقرآن والعلوم الإنسانية وللحديث، هذا يعقد في مدينة ميبوت. والمحاور التي يأخذ هذا المؤتمر هي القرآن وعلم النفس، القرآن وعلم الاجتماع، القرآن والاقتصاد، القرآن والفلسفة، القرآن وعلم الإلهيات، القرآن والأدب. المؤتمر الثالث الذي يعقد أيضا هذا في جامعة العلامة الطباطبائي في طهران، سنويا يعقد هذا المؤتمر للآراء الجديدة والنظريات الحديثة في العلوم القرآنية وأيضا الحديثة. وهناك مؤتمر آخر دولي تم عقده هذا المؤتمر 5 مرات في طهران. نعم، نأتي إلى المحور الثاني. المحور الأول كان البحث والدراسات للآراء الجديدة والحديثة حول القرآن الكريم والأحاديث الشريفة. المحور الثاني الذي ائتنت بها إيران هي محور التعليم، يعني إقامة دورات وأيضا تخصصات في القرآن الكريم والأحاديث الشريفة. هناك عندنا جامعات عدة، أكثر من 10 جامعات أو حتى 20 جامعة خاصة للقرآن الكريم، وهناك اختصاصات عدة، هذا موجود في كل بلد، وخاصة للقرآن الكريم والأحاديث الشريفة. أنا أذكر بعض هذه التخصصات. الأول في قسم التعليم تخصص دكتوراه في القرآن والعلوم ب10 تخصصات، القرآن والعلوم مع التركيز على الاقتصاد. القرآن والتربية في مرحلة دكتوراه PhD، القرآن والإدارة، القرآن والحقوق، القرآن والعلوم الاجتماعية، القرآن والعلوم السياسية، علم السياسة، القرآن وعلم النفس، القرآن والتاريخ، علم التاريخ، القرآن وعلم الفلك astronomy، القرآن وعلم الصحة والطب. في مرحلة هذا كله في مرحلة PhD دكتوراه. وفي مرحلة ماجستير أيضا هناك مركز خاص يقيم دورات في مرحلة ماجستير للقرآن ودراسات مختلفة كما ذكرت. وأيضا هناك تخصصات عدة في البحث حول العلوم القرآنية، وفي كما في جامعة الإمام الصادق في مرحلة ماجستير للبنين الإلهيات والتعاليم والمعارف الإسلامية، القرآن والعلوم السياسية، القرآن والشريعة، القرآن والإدارة، القرآن والاقتصاد، والقرآن والثقافة والعلاقات. علاقات يعني العلوم العلاقات بين الدول والعلاقات الخارجية. وأيضا في مرحلة دكتوراه هذه الجامعة أسست عدة اختصاصات كالقرآن والعلوم الإسلامية والعلوم علم السياسة، القرآن والاقتصاد، القرآن والحقوق، القرآن والثقافة، القرآن والعلاقات، القرآن والإدارة، القرآن والشريعة، القرآن والفقه، القرآن وعلوم التربية. وأيضا هناك جامعة أخرى مثل جامعة الرضوية في مشهد، وأيضا معهد عالي لتخصصات القرآنية. ثم هناك مراكز قد تهتم هذه المراكز بنشر المعارف والعلوم القرآنية والحديثة بمنظور ثقافي وعلوم اجتماعي وتربوي. فمن هذه المراكز مركز بحوث المهدي القرآني، فنشرت من هذا المركز إلى الآن على ما رأيت 17 كتاب في موضوعات مختلفة كلها آراء جديدة. الأول التفسير الموضوعي للشباب، هذا التفسير يتناول القرآن والصحة النفسية. القسم الثاني القرآن والرياضيات. بعد القرآن والشباب باسم القرآن والفن art. القرآن للشباب الإعجاز العلمي وعجائب القرآن. القرآن والشباب القرآن والرياضيات. تفسير الموضوعي للشباب القرآن والكونيات. تفسير الموضوعي أيضا خاص للشباب الإعجاز الطبي في القرآن. أيضا العجائب العلمية والبلاغية من القرآن الكريم، الإعجاز الطبي في القرآن. وفي الحديث عجائب طبية في نهج البلاغة، الإدارة العلوية في نهج البلاغة، والصحة في صحيفة سجادية كتاب حديث. التربية الاجتماعية للأطفال من منظور قرآني وحديثي. وهناك أيضا مركز آخر باسم مركز البحوث الحوزات العلمية والجامعات، وقد نشرت من هذا المركز عدة كتب. الأول نظرية المعرفة في القرآن الكريم. الثاني تحليل ومراجعة الأسس الكلامية في التفسير. الثالث التفسير الموضوعي للقرآن على حسب الحاجيات الأسر. البحث في العلاقة بين القرآن والثقافة المعاصرة، معرفة سلبيات التيارات التفسيرية القديمة والتيارات الحديثة القديمة، مراجعة المدارس والطرق التفسيرية، تفسير نظرية تفسير النص، هذه النظرية يعني معرفة النص حيث من المباحث الجديدة، لغة القرآن ومسائلها، تعدد المعاني في القرآن الكريم، تحليل لغة القرآن ومنهج فهمه. وأيضا هناك معهد آخر يهتم بالبحوث والثقافة والفكر الإسلامي، فطبع عدة كتب كتحليل لغة القرآن ومنهج فهمه، علم الكونيات في القرآن.
Excuse me, Professor, you have 3 minutes left. Thank
Okay,
you.
Okay. I have 3 minutes, so I will come to the conclusion, to the end. هناك القرآن والعلمانية، السياسة والحكم في القرآن، أصول التربية من منظور قرآني، ثم هناك نظريات جديدة كما ذكر الأستاذ قبلي من أستراليا، ذكر بعض الآراء الجديدة في علم الحديث، وهناك آراء جديدة حيث يداهمنا الوقت لا نستطيع أن ندخل عليها. أولا نظرية الباطن في القرآن الكريم، هذه النظرية جديدة وطرحت هذه النظرية واعترفت بها وزارة التعليم العالي. نظرية النسخ على 3 مراحل: النسخ المشروط، النسخ التمهيدي، النسخ التدريجي. ثم هناك نظرية التفسير بين التخصصات، يعني إذا نريد أن نفسر القرآن لابد أن نستفيد من العلوم الأخرى. نظرية الإعجاز المعرفي في القرآن، نظرية منطق الخطاب القرآني، نظرية اعتماد العلوم الإنسانية على القرآن. وقد هذا في نهاية كلامي، وقد ألف في هذه النظريات الجديدة أكثر من 1000 رسالة في مرحلة ماجستير ودكتوراه، وأيضا مئات من الكتب في النتائج العلمية الحديثة الجديدة للعلوم القرآنية والحديثة. وفي النهاية أنا أشكركم على حسن استماعكم إلى هذه الكلمات القاصرة. I would like to thank all of you for listening to this session, and also we hope that inshallah we will benefit from other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor Abdul Majid, for your talk. For all the participants, if you have a specific question to Professor Abdul Majid, you can write down your question in the chat box, and later during the Q&A, Professor Abdul Majid will answer your questions. Also, now I see that the participants in this conference, it's 148. Yeah, that's more than, it's almost 200, hopefully today. So there are a lot of participants here. And then we have just completed the talk from Professor Abdul Majid. And then we move to the third speakers, Ibu Lisfa Santosa Aisyah. Just before Ibu Santosa Aisyah start her speech, just to give you some information for all participants that the conference committee keep updated some information, including information about the book and some more information also about the material and papers of all speakers. So you can keep looking at the chat box to get updated information from the committee. Now we will start to hear the talk from Ibu Lisfa Santosa Aisyah. Ibu, you have 30 minutes and the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahilladzi arsala rasulahu bil huda wa dinil haq yusrahu ala dini kullih wa kafa billahi syahida. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa mawafa. Alhamdulillah, pada kesempatan pagi hari ini saya bisa berbicara sebagai salah satu narasumber di ICONQUHAS ini. Sebelumnya saya mohon maaf, bahasa saya campur-campur nih ya. Mungkin terkadang pakai bahasa Indonesia, tapi banyaknya pakai bahasa Indonesia mungkin. Jadi gado-gado nih, ada bahasa Indonesia, Inggris, Arab, mungkin saya campur-campur. Pada kesempatan di ICONQUHAS ini, izinkan saya untuk menyampaikan beberapa catatan saya dan penelitian saya yang terkait dengan digitalisasi hadis. Sebelumnya saya juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Al-Mukarram Amir Kuliah Usuluddin Jami'ah Syarif Hidayatullah Al-Islamiyah Al-Hukumiyah Dr. Yusuf Rahman, Al-Mukarram Adis Duderja, Ustadz di Griffith University Australia, Al-Mukarram Profesor Dr. Hamidullah min Iran, wa Al-Mukarram Dr. Abdul Hamid, wa Ra'isul Jalasah Acep Muslim. Itimaman ala Afwan, izin share dulu sebentar. Maudu'i fi hadal bahas an digitalisasi hadis, bahas an aplikasi hadis fi asril al-an, yani an nashr hadis bit teknologiya. Kama arafna an al hadis fil asril awal inda asrin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam maktub fi sahifah misal sahifah as-sadiqah wa sahifah as-sahihah fi muallafin khas. Summa nusyira al-kutub al-hadisiyah fi ba'dil bilad wal an fi khususan fi awali sanah Ishrun, sanah alfain 2000-an, wujudu software wa aplikasi hadis fi ba'dil barnamij misal software mawsu'ah al-kutub at-tis'ah ensiklopedia hadis 9 imam, al-maktabah asy-syamilah, maktabah alfiyah di sunnah nabawiyah, wa software marja' al-akbar, wa software jawami al-kalim, wa ghairuha. Wa kullu software jami'u software hada tahmil fi ba'dil website. Nastati an nahmilaha fi ba'di website. Wa yumkin this is okay nih. Ini klik. Oke. Wa inda asri teknologi wa an nastati an nuqaddimal hadis fi ba'dil media sosial mislu WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Wa maudu hadis fi media sosial mawjud bi meme, film kartun, ceramah, wa ghairuha. Nah, terlepas dari beberapa kelebihan kajian hadis secara teknologi ini, teknologi atau digitalisasi ini yang cukup efektif fi nasril hadis wa ulumuha, lakin mazala kasir ba'du du'afa fi sanadihim. Begitu juga dalam fahmul hadis, ya, yang terkesan masih tekstual dan kurang komprehensif. Nah, ta'aruf ba'dil software wa aplikasi hadis, khususan fi aplikasi hadis an bahsi sanadil hadis. Al-awwal software mausu'ah al-kutub at-tis'ah. Software ini awaluha maktub di CD. Wa ma'ruf fi awali sanah alfain. Maktub bi kutubut tis'ah wa huwa Sahih Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawud, Sunan At-Tirmizi, Sunan An-Nasai, Sunan Ibnu Majah, Sunan Ad-Darimi, wa Muwatta Malik wa Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal. Wa fi sanah 2010 sebuah lembaga yang bergerak di bidang keagamaan dan publikasi ilmu dan dakwah Islam yang didirikan oleh alumni Timur Tengah dan Lembaga Ilmu Pengetahuan Islam dan Arab atau LIPIA Jakarta serta beberapa perguruan tinggi lainnya yang kemudian dinamai dengan Nidwa Pusaka menerbitkan atau melengkapi, ya, menyempurnakan software ini dengan menggunakan diterjemahkannya menggunakan bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesia. Sekarang ini sudah lebih bagus, ya, softwarenya. Kelebihan dari software Mausu'ah Kutub Tis'ah ini, imtiazan fi hadha software, hunaka suhulah fi bahsil hadis, khususan fi sanadihi, maktub hunaka ismur rawi, wafatuhum, wa tabaqatuhum, wa hunaka mawjud tarjamah bi lughatil Indonesia, bil lughatil Injiliziyah. Begitu juga teks hadis dan terjemahnya juga bisa di copy paste sehingga mudah untuk disalin dan mudah dipakai bagi pembelajar hadis pemula terutama. Aplikasi ini hadir dalam versi desktop online. Online-nya bisa dilihat di http://libid2.com.app baik berbayar maupun tidak dan versi mobile. Ya, sayangnya sekarang ini ketika saya mengakses agak beberapa kesulitan kalau tidak berbayar. Jadi sekarang ini Li2 Pusaka lebih mudah untuk diakses kalau kita berlangganan. Jadi ketika kita buka nanti ada kemudian di situ langganan untuk membuka software ini supaya lebih mudah. Sebentar, coba nanti saya tampilkan beberapa software setelah saya sampaikan beberapa materi tentang ini, ya. Di samping itu, dalam aplikasi Li2 Pusaka ini atau Mausu'ah Kutub Tis'ah ini disebutkan juga hadis-hadis berdasarkan sandarannya, yaitu dilihat dari sisi sandarannya ada hadis qudsi, hadis mauquf, dan hadis maktub. Begitu juga jika terdapat hadis yang terputus sanadnya dimasukkan dalam kumpulan pengelompokan hadis berdasarkan bab dan indeks. Meskipun demikian, software ini kelemahannya tidak disebutkan relasi guru dan muridnya, sehingga sulit ditemukan ittisal tidaknya sanad hadis karena belum ada kepastian pertemuan antara satu rawi dengan rawi yang lain. Fi hadhihi software, yakni hunaka dhafun fi ittisalus tilmid wa ustaduhu lihada la yashulu alaina an nahkumat ittisal fi hadha sanad. Ini gambaran softwarenya. Begitu dibuka, kita ketemu ini dulu, baru kemudian muncul ini. Ya, muncul kemudian kutub. Di sini terpampang kutub at-tis'ah, ya. 9 kitab hadis yang nanti semuanya bisa dibuka secara keseluruhan, satu persatu bisa dibuka. Nanti saya akan coba praktekkan. Dan bisa untuk mencari hadis, khususnya untuk hadis-hadis yang termaktub dalam kutub tis'ah, ini sangat membantu. Tapi tentunya software ini tidak kemudian semata-mata menjadi rujukan untuk takhrij ya, tetap saja harus dirujuk kepada kitab aslinya, sebagaimana banyak beberapa ulama dan ustadz untuk tetap menyarankan penggunaan software ini hanya sebagai pembanding dan membantu saja, tapi untuk takhrij lebih lengkapnya itu juga harus merujuk kepada buku aslinya. Tadi misalnya kelemahan dari software Mausu'ah Kutub Tis'ah ini atau Litbah Pusaka ini juga seperti banyak dinyatakan dalam beberapa jurnal dan juga beberapa penelitian, itu adalah kesulitannya untuk menemukan ittisalus sanad dari sisi bersambung tidaknya guru dan murid, karena tidak disebutkan di sini guru dan muridnya. Sehingga dalam ilmu rijalul hadis nanti, kalau dalam biasa saya misalnya mengajar dalam rijalul hadis ya, beberapa kelemahannya itu adalah untuk menemukan ittisal tidaknya sanad ini dengan menggunakan Litbah Pusaka Mausu'ah Kutub Tis'ah ini agak sulit ya. Jadi harus dibantu dengan kitab-kitab hadis lainnya. Asani software Maktabah Alfiyah Lisunnah An-Nabawiyah. Software ini mencakup 1.300 kitab. Software ini diterbitkan oleh situs www.turos.com. Hanya saja ia harus diinstal dengan mendownload Magic Disk. Kelebihan software ini dilengkapi beberapa literatur tafsir, di tokoh kitab, informasi dan halaman kitab, dan software ini lebih tepat disebut sebagai perpustakaan digital. Ya. Sehingga software ini kurang digunakan untuk dalam penelitian takhrij hadis dan rijalul hadis. Yang ketiga, software Marja Al-Akbar. Software ini hanya berisi kajian hadis, tapi juga termasuk di dalamnya juga ada disiplin ilmu lainnya yang sangat luas. Ya. Di sini kelebihannya tampilan menu bahasa yang terdapat ini ada beberapa pilihan bahasa ya, ada bahasa Arab atau bahasa Inggris. Cuma sayangnya belum ada bahasa Indonesianya. Yang keempat, ini ada software Gawami Al-Kalim. Kalau orang Mesir menyebut jim itu jadi G, jadi makanya bisa ditulisnya Gawami Al-Kalim. Tapi kalau di softwarenya sendiri ditulisnya Jawami Al-Kalim, ya, versi 405. Software ini juga merupakan ensiklopedia hadis yang mencakup 1.400 kitab hadis, termasuk yang masih manuskrip. Nah, ini yang menarik. Di Jawami'ul Kalim ini termasuk masih ada buku-buku yang masih maktut, ya, yaitu masih manuskrip. Ya, dan edisi terakhir software ini dikeluarkan pada tahun 2012. Software ini dibuat oleh lembaga Idarah Al-Amah Lil Auqaf Qatar bekerjasama dengan islamweb.net. Software ini pada awalnya mudah untuk di-download ya. Tahmil hadza software suhulah. Lakin al-an ghairu suhulah. Ya, jadi di sini ada waktu itu sempat sudah ditutup dan sekarang ini masih bisa di-download di link www.fikihkontemporer.com. Download software hadis terlengkap HTML. Jawami'ul Kalim ini termasuk yang imtiaz ya, termasuk yang mumayyaz ya, termasuk yang mumtaz dalam banyak hal karena memudahkan mencari sanad dan matan hadis dengan cepat. Pencarian rawi dengan profil dan jarah ta'dilnya juga disebutkan, bahkan dilengkapi dengan referensi kitab Tahdzibul Kamar karya Al-Mizzi yang termasuk lengkap dalam pembahasan rijalul hadis. Nah ini menurut saya dari beberapa software yang ada, Jawami'ul Kalim termasuk juga islamweb.net ya, islamweb.net juga sama. Jadi Jawami'ul Kalim ini awalnya itu di bawah islamweb.net ya, tapi kemudian akhirnya terpecah menjadi dua software. ada Jamiul Kalim, ada islamweb.net. Jadi ada dua software. Cuma saya di sini tidak membahas software yang islamweb.net ya. Tampilannya memang mirip ya, karena memang awalnya Jamiul Kalim ini bagian dari islamweb.net, tapi kemudian akhirnya dipisahkan. Kelebihan lain dari software ini adalah penyajian takhrij hadis yang lengkap, pencarian berdasar tema, memuat biografi 70.000 perawi, membandingkan dengan beberapa kitab, dan mengklasifikasi qauliyah, fi'liyah, dan takririyah. Ya. Mengklasifikasi hadis-hadis yang qauliyah, fi'liyah, dan takririyah, juga menyajikan jarh wa ta'dil perawi dan kualitas hadis. Begitu juga software ini dapat digunakan untuk penelitian matan hadis. Nah, ini yang menariknya, di Jamiul Kalim ini termasuk komplit ya. Karena dia juga termasuk bisa meneliti bukan hanya sanad tapi juga termasuk matan hadisnya. Dalam hal ini matan hadis ada kaidah-kaidah dalam penelitian matan hadis ini, jika hadis itu harus tidak bertentangan dengan hadis yang lain, sehingga nanti software Jamiul Kalim ini menampilkan ketika ada hadis yang semakna dan hadis yang tadadud ya, yang kontradiktif. Nah, maka software ini sangat membantu untuk mentakhrij hadis secara sanad maupun juga meneliti matan hadisnya. Jika ada yang kontradiktif, software ini juga akan menampilkan hadis-hadis yang kontradiktif. Sayangnya software ini memang tapinya tidak ada untuk membandingkan dengan Al-Quran, karena dia tidak memasukkan software atau aplikasi Al-Quran di dalamnya. Sehingga untuk membandingkan ketika sebuah matan hadis itu bertentangan dengan Al-Quran, itu tidak bisa ya, karena ini hanya berisi hanya hadis-hadis saja. Sayangnya software ini meskipun banyak kelebihannya dan termasuk yang sangat komprehensif menurut saya, sayangnya hanya menggunakan bahasa Arab, sehingga hanya bagi orang yang paham bahasa Arab yang bisa menggunakannya. Begitu juga dengan menu yang tersedia tidak dirancang untuk penelitian sanad dan matan hadis. Jadi menu-menunya itu agak tersembunyi, tidak secara letterlock, tidak secara zohir gitu ya, terlihat kemudian ketika mencari bahas ya, kemudian nanti akan muncul gitu. Nah, dia bahasanya bukan seperti itu, makanya agak sulit untuk menggunakannya. Padahal sebenarnya software Jawami'ul Kalim ini termasuk software yang sangat komprehensif. Yang kelima, untuk meneliti sanad hadis ini terutama juga bisa menggunakan software Al-Maktabah Asy-Syamilah. Ini termasuk software yang pertama kali muncul ya di kalangan dunia Islam secara umum ya, secara global untuk penelitian hadis ya. Ia merupakan perpustakaan digital yang bukan hanya berisi kitab-kitab hadis ya. Ini Maktabah Asy-Syamilah ini memang meliputi berbagai macam kitab fi ba'dil funun ya, fiqh al-fiqh wal hadis wa tafsir wal iktisad wal siyasiyah wa ghairuha. Kelebihan software ini adalah mudahnya mencari hadis ya, dan bisa tersambung langsung dengan kitab syarahnya. Jadi kalau kita buka Maktabah Asy-Syamilah, ketika kita ingin tahu mengklik sebuah mencari hadis, kemudian mengklik nanti akan muncul hadisnya, misalnya ditemukan dalam Sahih Al-Bukhari. Nah, nanti bisa langsung kemudian tersambung dengan kitab syarahnya. Ya, terutama misalnya syarah yang paling populer, syarah Fathul Barinya. Ya, sehingga bisa langsung diketahui jika maknanya sulit dipahami atau terdapat beberapa hadis yang semakna. Di samping itu tentunya software ini juga punya kekurangan ya, karena hanya menggunakan bahasa Arab ya, sehingga sulit bagi pemula dan yang tidak paham bahasa Arab menggunakannya. Sama seperti Jawami'ul Kalim ya, dia belum ada translate menggunakan bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggrisnya. Kalau Islamweb.net itu sekarang sudah ada, alhamdulillah sudah ada bahasa Inggris dan bahasa Indonesianya, sehingga lebih mudah. Cuma memang untuk memudahkan mencari, tetap saja di Islamweb.net itu juga tetap lebih mudahnya tetap menggunakan bahasa Arab ternyata. Jadi untuk bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggrisnya, bahkan kalau Islamweb.net itu ada juga bahasa Jerman, bahasa Prancis pilihannya. Cuma memang yang lebih mudah untuk mencari itu adalah menggunakan bahasa Arab ya. Lagi-lagi itu salah satu kelemahan dari software-software hadis yang ada di dunia ini sampai saat ini ya. Nah, dalam konteks Indonesia kita akan bicara tentang hadis dalam teknologi hadis ya, dan kajiannya di media sosial. Tentu di sini tidak lepas dari peran Kiai Haji Ahmad Lutfi Fatullah dan Pusat Kajian Hadisnya, ya, karena beliau termasuk pencetus, ya, selain Lidwa Pusaka tadi, ya, di awal tahun 2000-an itu termasuk punya peran yang sangat besar, ya, dalam digitalisasi hadis di Indonesia. Karena almarhum Ustaz Lutfi Fatullah dan lembaganya Pusat Kajian Hadis ini dianggap sebagai pencetus dan pembuat berbagai aplikasi hadis di Indonesia, baik yang dibuat oleh Allahyarham Kiai Lutfi sendiri beserta timnya atau mahasiswa prodi ilmu hadis dari berbagai PTKI, Perguruan Tinggi Keagamaan Islam di Indonesia yang pesantren di Pusat Kajian Hadis Cinagara Bogor selama beberapa bulan yang menghasilkan berbagai aplikasi hadis yang ringan untuk dibaca. Jadi Kiai Lutfi ini berusaha untuk membuat masyarakat umum itu bisa memahami hadis secara simpel, gitu ya, dengan membuat aplikasi-aplikasi yang cukup bisa di-download di Google Play Store, ya, lalu kemudian bisa masuk di Android kita, di HP kita, di laptop kita, yaitu sangat mudah sekali untuk kemudian bisa kita mengaksesnya dan sangat simpel sekali, sehingga bagi pemula atau seperti ibu majelis taklim dan lain sebagainya, ya, yang belum paham hadis itu sangat mudah untuk memahami hadis dengan secara simpel. Ini beberapa aset digital Pusat Kajian Hadis, ada dari website, media sosial, flash app, web aplikasi, dilanjut dengan pengembangan aplikasi Android dan iOS. Ya, iOS ini untuk Apple, ya. Ada websitenya Pusat Kajian Hadis, Warung Ustadz, Ulama Dunia, Jendela Ilmu, Gerai PKH. Kemudian ada di sosmednya, sosial media. Ini kemarin ada saya menguji mahasiswa yang tidak bisa membedakan antara sosial media dengan web, ya. Sosial media itu berarti ada interaksi harusnya. Nah, itu termasuk Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Kemudian juga di web flashnya ini ada ilmu hadis. Nah, ini untuk belajar ilmu hadis secara simpel, ini mudah untuk mendownload, tinggal mendownload di Google Play Store, hadis dan ilmu hadis pkh.or.id. Ya, terus kemudian juga keutamaan Al-Quran, potret Nabi Muhammad, ini mengenal Nabi Muhammad secara ringkas, siapa ayahnya, ibunya, kapan beliau lahir, siapa yang menyusui dan seterusnya, ini disebutkan secara ringkas di dalam aplikasi potret Nabi Muhammad ini. Kemudian Sahih Bukhari, kemudian di web aplikasi juga ada Al-Quran Al-Hadi, ada Masuk Surga. Ini yang sangat banyak, ini perpustakaan Islam digital yang sangat dengan mudah, ada ribuan kitab dari berbagai funun, ya, dari berbagai bidang, termasuk ada hadis, tafsir, ya, iktisad, ya, ekonomi, siasah dan seterusnya. Kemudian juga ada dunia masjid, ada lagi webnya manasik haji dan umroh, potret Nabi Muhammad, sama dengan yang tadi, ya, satu hari satu hadis. Ini beliau menyebutnya kalau di Al-Quran itu ada odoj, ya, one day one hadis, one day one juz, ya. Kalau di hadis itu ada odoh, one day one hadis, ya. Kalau di Al-Quran kan one day one juz, odoj. Kalau di hadis itu beliau mendemonstrasikan tentang perlunya one day one hadis, ya, satu hari satu hadis. Maka dia bikin aplikasinya. Kemudian Yusro.id. Nah, dari Android ini juga ada beberapa yang bisa di-download di Google Play Store, ada Al-Quran Al-Hadi, potret Nabi Muhammad, sama, ya, 40 kumpulan ayat populer, manasik haji dan umroh, 40 hadis mudah dihafal, sanad dan matan Imam Bukhari, satu hari satu hadis, sama, ya, ini bedanya bisa di-download di Android, ya. Masuk Surga, fatwa dan tausiah MUI, kurban, sejarah fikih dan fadilah. Untuk di iOS, di Apple, ini bisa juga di-download Al-Quran Al-Hadi, potret. Ini sebenarnya sama, ya, namanya, cuma hanya bedanya beliau masukkan juga itu bisa di iOS, bisa di Android dan sebagainya. Nah, itu karya pribadi beliau khususnya, karya almarhum Kiai Lutfi Fatullah lebih khususnya, dan beberapa karya lainnya yang kemudian santri-santri yang dibimbing oleh beliau dan timnya juga sudah menghasilkan 50 aplikasi yang dapat di-download di Google Play Store, hasil kreativitas mahasiswa ilmu hadis yang pesantren di Pusat Kajian Hadis Cinagara Bogor. Ada 50 aplikasi hadis itu adalah, ada banyak, ya. Ini ada 40 hadis keutamaan sholat, 40 hadis kursi, 40 hadis kewajiban seorang istri. Kebanyakan mereka mahasiswa ilmu hadis dari berbagai PTKIN maupun PTKIS itu mereka mesantren minimal 40 hari. Jadi biasanya satu hari mereka menghasilkan satu aplikasi hadis, satu hadis gitu ya, masukkan di aplikasinya. Nanti dalam 40 hari itu kemudian mereka berhasil memasukkan 40 hadis dalam aplikasi yang mereka buat ini. Makanya kebanyakan judulnya 40 hadis kursi, 40 hadis keutamaan sholat, 40 hadis populer keutamaan Al-Quran, kemudian takhrij hadis antara teori dan praktik ya, 20 hadis tentang akidah, Riyadus Shalihat, aplikasi hadis wanita sholihah, 40 hadis keajaiban sedekah, 40 hadis muamalah, ya, larangan riba dalam Al-Quran dan hadis, ya, 40 hadis tentang nikah. Nah, ini juga banyak ya, tafsir ringkas juga. Ini juga bukan hanya dalam bidang hadis ya, juga ada dalam bidang Al-Quran dan tafsir ya. 40 hadis tentang muamalah perempuan. Jadi kebanyakan 40 judulnya, 40 hadis. Karena memang mayoritas santri-santrinya itu mesantren di pusat kajian hadisnya itu 40 hari. Jadi targetnya satu hari itu mereka memasukkan satu hadis dalam aplikasinya. Jadi 40 hari, jadi 40 hadis gitu. Makanya kebanyakan dari UIN Bandung, dari mana-mana tuh biasanya paketnya tuh 40 hari ya. Nyantri 40 hari di PKH lalu menghasilkan aplikasi ya. Kemudian ini hadis wanita seputar haid, perdamaian yang kami pahami, kemudian ada kumpulan hadis tentang pemimpin, 40 hadis perempuan, 40 hadis tentang toleransi, perdagangan dalam Al-Quran, mengikat makna di jagat maya, rata-rata kebanyakan 40 hadis tentang hewan dan tumbuhan, memaknai tawakal dalam Al-Quran, ya, ada kajian tafsirnya juga ya. Jadi ini variasi ada, tapi mayoritas lebih banyak adalah kajian-kajian hadis. Ya, jadi ini ya ada beberapa ada 50 aplikasi yang hasil karya mahasiswa ilmu hadis dari PTKI seluruh Indonesia yang pesantren di pusat kajian hadis ini yang dibimbing oleh Allahyarham Ustadz Lutfi Fatullah beserta timnya. Ya, ini salah satu contoh digitalisasi hadis yang sangat simpel dan mudah untuk bisa diakses dan juga mudah untuk dipahami oleh berbagai kalangan ya. Apalagi misalnya saat ini di Indonesia termasuk kalangan menengah ke atas ya, cukup giroh keislamannya cukup tinggi sehingga memudahkan mereka untuk memahami hadis secara simpel. Inilah tentang perkembangan digitalisasi hadis khususnya di Indonesia ya. Ini saya bicaranya lebih banyak konteks Indonesia, tapi yang tadi mau Lidwa Pusaka dan termasuk juga khususnya Maktabah Syamilah Jamiul Kalim itu sudah tingkat internasional karena yang membuat juga itu Qatar. Ya, tapi di sini juga tentunya ada kemudahan tapi juga ada kelebihannya ya. Tentunya kelebihannya juga cukup banyak, sangat membantu untuk takhrij hadis. Kalau biasanya mahasiswa itu mentakhrij hadis itu dalam waktu harus ke perpustakaan berhari-hari ya, dengan digitalisasi hadis ini, dengan aplikasi ini, dengan software ini memudahkan 2-3 jam sudah bisa ketemu hadisnya, ittisal tidaknya, dan kemudian dari sisi jarah takdilnya yaitu bisa terlihat secara langsung ya. Tapi meskipun demikian beberapa ulama hadis tetap melihat bahwa aplikasi dan software ini hanyalah sebagai pembanding ya, dan tetap saja baiknya tetap merujuk ke kitab aslinya. Sayangnya juga banyak saya temukan ketika membimbing skripsi mahasiswa itu banyak yang membahas takhrij itu hanya menggunakan aplikasi hadis, terutama biasanya banyakkan Maktabah Syamilah dan juga Lidwa Pusaka ya. Nah, sayangnya kemudian tidak mengecek lagi ke buku aslinya sehingga terdapat beberapa kesalahan dalam kesimpulannya. Nah, tentu kita juga harus bersyukur dan ini juga menjadi catatan ke depannya khususnya untuk prodi ilmu hadis ini untuk adanya integrasi keilmuan ya, sebagaimana tadi disampaikan oleh Profesor Dr. Hamidullah, perlu adanya integrasi keilmuan. Kalau tadi Prof. Hamidullah itu membahas dari sisi tafsirnya ya, terus perlu kemudian kolaborasi dengan tafsir nafsi ya, tafsir ijtimai dengan bidang sosiologi, tafsir nafsi dengan psikologi ya, tafsir siasi dengan ilmu politik dan sebagainya. Sama halnya dalam hadis, dalam digitalisasi hadis ini juga perlu diperlukan takhassusat, perlu diperlukan integrasi keilmuan antara ilmu teknologi dengan ilmu hadis ya. Sehingga bisa dibuatlah aplikasi dan software hadis yang lebih komprehensif dan lebih moderat menyaingi beberapa kajian-kajian hadis yang sangat tekstual di beberapa website ya dan media sosial misalnya. Nah, tentunya ini menjadi catatan paling panjang nantinya ke depannya ya. Saya coba akan menampilkan salah satu contoh aplikasi hadis yang mudah untuk digunakan ya. Ini misalnya aplikasi Lidwa Pusaka. Ya. Misalnya kita buka Sahih Bukhari. Nah, sekarang ini sayangnya sudah mulai pakai Pro upgrade ya. Jadi kalau misalnya kita mau mengakses lebih jauh, ini harus di-upgrade dan berbayar jadi langganan. Nah, misalnya ini hadis nomor 1, permulaan wahyu. Nah, ini sudah disebutkan nih hadis yang semisalnya. Sahih Bukhari nomor 52, nomor hadisnya. Nah, salah satu kelemahannya dalam takhrij itu ketika dicek ke buku aslinya Sahih Al-Bukhari, itu nomor hadisnya berbeda. Nomor hadis berbeda antara di dalam software ini dengan dalam kitabnya. Kalau kita cek ternyata teks yang diambil di Lidwa Pusaka ini adalah teks dari Fathul Bari. Ini disebutkan di atasnya, versi Fathul Bari. Ya. Jadi bukan versinya dari Sahih Al-Bukhari-nya langsung, padahal untuk tahrij itu kan harusnya ke buku induknya, ke buku Sahih Al-Bukhari-nya, bukan buku syarahnya. Ya. Nah, di sini ada Bukhari nomor 52, Bukhari nomor 6195, Bukhari nomor 6439 ya. Jadi ada beberapa hadis yang semakna dengannya, ini bisa dilihat di dalam beberapa riwayat. Karena Imam Al-Bukhari itu banyak tikror ya, pengulangan hadis dalam kitab Sahih Al-Bukhari-nya. Nah, kalau kita mau buka mau kita buka ini sanad hadisnya, perawinya juga bisa kita lihat nih. Tabaqatnya sudah disebutkan di sini. Umar bin Al-Khattab bin Nufail, kalangan sahabat, kunyahnya Abu Hafs, negeri hidupnya di Madinah, tahun wafat 23 Hijriah. Nah, disebutkan juga berapa saja riwayatnya Umar bin Khattab dalam Al-Kutub At-Tis'ah. Ya, di Bukhari ada 137, di Muslim ada 73 dan seterusnya. Kedudukannya sahabat. Sahabat menurut ulama hadis disebut kullu sahabi udul, sehingga tidak disebutkan jarh wa ta'dilnya. Karena
izin Ibu, waktunya tinggal 3 menit. Terima kasih.
Ya, Pak Acep, maaf Pak Acep. Kedua misalnya Alqamah bin Waqqas bin Mihsan ya, seperti disebutkan dalam teks sanadnya. Ini disebutkan juga tabaqatnya, negeri hidupnya, cuma kalau tahun wafatnya tidak ditemukan maka dikosongkan oleh Lidwa Pusaka ini. Kemudian Ibnu Hibban disebutkan dalam As-Siqat, berarti diasumsinya Ibnu Hibban ini termasuk As-Siqah. Yang menurut An-Nasai Siqah, menurut Ibnu Hajar juga Siqah sahabat, disebutkan jarh wa ta'dilnya. Kemudian Muhammad bin Ibrahim bin Al-Haris bin Khalid, ya ini termasuk kalangan tabi'in, kalangan biasa, kunyahnya, tahun wafatnya disebutkan. Kemudian juga disebutkan juga jumlah hadis yang diriwayatkannya. Kemudian Yakub bin Syaibah, ya juga disebutkan di sini, Siqah, disebutkan juga di situ jarh wa ta'dilnya. Cuma di sini kelemahannya tadi tidak disebutkan syuyukh dan talamidnya ya, guru-guru dan murid-muridnya, sehingga untuk menentukan apakah ittisal sanadnya agak sulit. Harus dibantu dengan Jawami'ul Kalim atau software lainnya yang lebih komplit ya, lebih komprehensif. Ini juga termasuk Yahya bin Sa'id ya, 144 Hijriah, wafatnya Sufyan bin Uyainah. Ya, ini dijelaskan semua tabaqatnya. Salah satu hal yang biasanya saya bimbing mahasiswa ketika membimbing mata kuliah Rijalul Hadis ya, biasanya saya hanya memberikan tugas mudah. Tentukan di dalam sanad ini mana sahabat, mana tabi'in, mana tabi'ut tabi'innya. Kelihatannya kan gampang soalnya, tapi begitu dicari di Rijalul Hadis, kitab Rijalul Hadis itu tidak seluruhnya. Kita harus cek lagi buku tabaqat. Kalau bicara tentang Rijalul Hadis, kita harus cek beberapa kitab rijal. Kitab rijalnya, biografinya, kemudian kitab al-jarh wa ta'dilnya, kemudian kitab tabaqatnya. Ya, itu ada beberapa kitab, tapi dengan software ini kita cukup dengan membuka aplikasi ini kita bisa menemukan kumpulan dari beberapa kitab itu cukup sudah ada di dalam software misalnya Lidwa Pusaka ini termasuk juga Jawamiul Kalim dan beberapa software lainnya. Islam Webnet termasuk yang cukup lengkap. Di Islam Webnet bahkan beberapa hadis-hadis yang tidak terlalu populer di dalam buku-buku yang tidak populer ya, itu banyak juga disebutkan. Ya cuma kekurangannya memang fitur-fiturnya agak sulit ya, sehingga untuk takhrij dan sebagainya itu harus betul-betul ngerti fiturnya. Ini lebih cocoknya dia masuknya untuk bahasnya, untuk carinya di mana, dan harus paham bahasa Arab dengan benar. Baik, itu barangkali beberapa hal yang bisa saya sampaikan tentang digitalisasi hadis, khususnya perkembangannya di Indonesia ini, dan bagaimana mungkin menjadi kedepannya menjadi catatan kita untuk supaya ada integrasi ilmu antara ilmu hadis dengan teknologi ya, supaya bisa lebih maksimal lagi dalam penelitian hadisnya. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Ibu Lisva. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sangat menarik. Ibu Lisva share with us, bercerita bersama kita tadi tentang perkembangan bagaimana teknologi digital, aplikasi dimanfaatkan dalam kajian-kajian hadis, sehingga muncul berbagai aplikasi ensiklopedia yang semakin lengkap. Sebagian bahasanya masih hanya terbatas dalam in Arabic, dalam bahasa Arab, tapi sebagian juga sudah tersedia dalam bahasa Indonesia, dan bahkan later on we've seen also some new progress that there are new application yang menyediakan hadis-hadis secara praktis ya, kumpulan-kumpulan hadis yang lebih praktis, 40 hadis tentang amaliyah tertentu misalnya dan lain sebagainya. And I think that's really a good progress that will enable the common societies, masyarakat umum, untuk bisa mempelajari hadis secara langsung. Thank you so much again, Bu Risma, for such interesting talk. Kita akan langsung menuju ke pembicara keempat. Saya tahu di sini di chat box sudah ada banyak pertanyaan, interesting question, and then just you can wait for about in 30 minutes, and then we will have a direct Q&A. But again, if you want to write down your question, especially mungkin kepada Ibu Lisva, karena beliau baru saja menyelesaikan presentasinya, you can write down your questions and direct it to Ibu Lisva. Now we move to the third speaker, kepada Bapak Abdul Hakim. Bapak, are you listening my voice? Halo, Bapak.
Halo. Iya.
Oke, Bapak 30 menit and then you can start your talk. Thank you so much.
Baik, terima kasih. Thank you to Mr. Acep Muslim to give me a chance to present my paper. Honorable to the Dean of Faculty of Usuluddin, Honorable the all presenter, Professor Dr. Abdul Majid Hakimullah, to Dr. Adi Studireja, and to Ibu Lisva Santosa Aisyah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wa bihi nasta'in ala umuri dunya waddin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursalin. Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi washabihi ajmain, amma ba'du. In this discussion I will talk about the paradigma baru teori common link dalam kajian hadis kontemporer. About the common link. Common link theory has really become a topic that is widely discussed in contemporary hadith studies, especially when discussing the development of hadith studies among Western scholars. This can be seen from the many articles on the theory that are currently present. The common link theory is always interesting to study further because the conclusion offer sound contrary to what the reader believes, especially for Muslim. Therefore, many Muslim scholars are trying to re-examine and offer then comment on this theory. Common link is a term used to refer to a scholar who get a hadith from usually rarely more than one, from more than one scholar. Then he teach to a number of disciples, and then his student teach again to his other student. According to Joseph Sah, Kamerling is the person who is responsible for the occurrence of hadith forgery. For John Ball, Kamerling is the third or fourth scholar who have more than one disciple. If there is not from the Prophet Muhammad, to the third or fourth transmitter is a single strand, then the hadith is considered as a false, and the hadith is made by the Kamerling, not from the Prophet Muhammad. This is the picture or diagram of the Kamerling theory from Joseph Sah. From this diagram, we can see that the Kamerling of this isnad is Amr bin Abi Amr Maula Muttalib. Joseph Sah said that the third isnad is false, and this isnad is made by Amr bin Muttalib. So he is the responsible for this isnad and also responsible to the spirit of hadith. The diagram of Kamerling theory from Jambal is like this. This is from Prophet to the companion and then to successor, and the Kamerling is from the successor. And Jambal said that there is no Kamerling from companion, and there is no Kamerling from that Nabi or Prophet Muhammad is never been a Kamerling. But from the analysis of Harad Motsky, there is a Kamerling from a companion. And from this conclusion, Harad Motsky said that the hadith is authentic because the Kamerling is from the companion. Okay. And then the use of Kamerling theory. Joseph Sah used the Kamerling theory to separate between the fictitious isnad and the original isnad. The original isnad for Sah was a string of transmitter from a Kamerling to the compiler of hadith or mukharrij that contain a hadith in their book. John Ball used a Kamerling to find out the originator of the hadith. According to John Ball, there is no companion become a Kamerling. The majority of the Kamerling, the majority of companion have only one disciple when narrating the hadith. And if they have two or more disciples, they do not qualify as a partial Kamerling. So the companion cannot qualify as a Kamerling. Harad Motsky has a different opinion. According to Harad Motsky, Kamerling is not a forger of hadith, but he is a collector and disseminator of hadith. The Kamerling position is a collector of hadith who received from the teacher, and well as a teacher who convey the hadith to his student. Okay, and this is a new look or the new paradigm. In a deep analysis of mine, I found that this Kamerling phenomenon does seem real, whereby the time the isnad bundle is created, the central figure is the source of the passage, both seen from the upper part and from the bottom will appear this important figure. It appeared from him that the hadith began to spread, and to him the hadith arrived. Therefore, this phenomenon of Kamerling cannot be rejected. It's just that when this important figure is later regarded as a hadith forger, then this is a conclusion that has no solid basis. So according to me, that John Ball's opinion is have no solid basis. The people who build the common link are the scholar were based on historical data, where the first hadith writer who got the task from the government at that time record the hadith. And the figure live in the period after the official hadith of hadith writing order and carried out because the received order from the government. With the effort to write this hadith, this figure later became a collector of hadith. And there is a problem in determination of common link status by John Paul. The designation of this figure as common link, as done by John Paul, is not entirely wrong, but it is still not strong enough if it is based on the argument of the theory that common link are people who have at least 2 students. The argument made by John Paul was based on solely on the Kutub Sittah, only Kutub Sittah, so that finally the common link was the scholar from among the successor or tabi'in. Meanwhile, if the entire part of hadith narration contained in other book also applied in the isnad bundle, it will be found that many companions are worthy being common link, and even the Prophet Muhammad also being common link. But I have a suggestion to use the common link theory. In the purpose of using this common link theory is to find out when the hadith began to spread and who was responsible for its dissemination. Then this theory, according to me, can be used, and with this theory, it will be able to corroborate the authenticity of the Prophet hadith. And then common link theory also can be used to obtain historical data on the development of Islamic civilization in order to find out the issues that development in Muslim society at the time when the hadith was spread in general. And that hadith was used by the scholar as an argument in establishing laws that were very important at that time. This is my suggestion. Secara garis besar, saya ingin menyampaikan bahwa berdasarkan analisis terhadap karya-karya yang membahas tentang common link, bahwa ternyata fenomena common link ini sulit untuk ditolak. Jadi memang benar ada, ya, dan ketika sanad itu dibuat bundelnya, maka akan ditemukan seorang common link. Hanya saja kalau John Paul itu mengatakan common link harus seseorang yang minimal punya 2 murid. Akan tetapi setelah saya perhatikan dalam bukunya The Encyclopedia of Canonical Hadith, itu ternyata dia tidak selalu konsisten bahwa seseorang yang diberi status common link adalah orang yang punya 2 murid. Jadi ada yang hanya punya 1 murid, kemudian disebut the believable common link. Ada lagi yang disebut dengan undeniable common link. Dari sini bisa disimpulkan bahwa minimal ya untuk teori common link ini seseorang bisa dinyatakan atau layak menjadi common link itu minimal punya 2 murid. Dan kekurangan dari John Paul dalam menetapkan status common link itu adalah kurangnya data. Jadi sumber yang dia gunakan itu hanya dari Kutub Sittah karena dia menerjemahkan dari karya Al-Mizzi, yaitu Tuhfatul Asraf bi Ma'rifatil Atraf. Karena itu ketika common link ini digunakan dan sumber datanya itu mencakup seluruh kitab hadis baik yang kanonik maupun yang pre-kanonik, maka common link ini bisa digunakan untuk menguatkan autentisitas hadis. Tapi common link ini tidak bisa dinafikan, ini bisa digunakan untuk menemukan autentisitas hadis. Juga ini kalau mengikuti konsepnya Joseph Sah bahwa terjadi berbagai hal ya, bahwa suatu hadis itu tersebar itu juga karena isu-isu tertentu, maka dengan menggunakan teori common link ini kita bisa melihat oh mungkin saja memang benar bahwa hadis itu tersebar pada satu masa, ya, dan kemudian akan bisa dipelajari ada isu apa yang terjadi pada masa itu. Jadi common link ini teorinya bisa digunakan dalam penelitian sejarah, bisa menguatkan data sejarah, dan juga bisa digunakan untuk menguatkan posisi atau autentisitas hadis Nabi. Jadi saya punya usulan bahwa common link ini digunakan, tapi bukan untuk mengetahui siapa yang membuat hadis palsu, siapa originator atau orang yang pertama kali menyebarkan hadis itu, tapi untuk mengetahui bahwa hadis itu betul-betul otentik dan juga untuk menguatkan data sejarah. Mungkin itu. Jadi saya tidak akan memperpanjang agar nanti tidak diberi peringatan oleh moderator. Mungkin kita lanjutkan ke diskusi karena saya lihat sudah cukup banyak ya itu pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang ditujukan pada presenter sebelumnya, dan saya ucapkan terima kasih, thank you to Mr. Acep, and finally I say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much for Bapak Dr. Abdul Hakim for your presentation about the common link theory in Hadith study especially. He shared with us about the common link theory by referring to, among others, the theory from Joseph Schach, and also providing some debates about what's the strength and the weakness of the common link theory in the study of Hadith. Okay, Excellencies, guest speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we have completed the presentation session. So all our special speakers have completed their talks, and then let's move to the discussion session. I've seen that there are some written questions here, and I've seen also here a participant who have raised her hand. But I will start with those who have written the questions earlier. So I will start by trying to compile all questions based on the to whom those questions directed to, and I will start by reading all questions directed to Dr. Adis, and then I will then again read all questions directed to Professor Abdul Majid. I will start with the question for Dr. Adis. The first question is from Agusman Armansyah. I know that Dr. Adis actually already provide a short answer for this question, but probably Dr. Adis will elaborate again his answer to this question. So the first question for Dr. Adis from Agusman Armansyah from Institute Darul Quran. The question is, Dr. Adis talked about epistemological novelty, which characterize contextualist progressive approach. Can you elaborate further and how it is significantly different from the remaining approaches you explained? It is kind of epistemological grafting in understanding hadith against the contemporary challenges, or any other explanation. And then the second question from Yusuf Rahman. Dear Dr. Adis Sudarija, I agree with you. This is from Bapak Dekan. I agree with you with the importance of contextual progressive approach to hadith. Recently, we have son of Kiai who is charged with committing a crime of sexually abusing santri. However, he reasoned his action with referring to the hadith, which allows him to do so. Do you think that this person has abused the hadith? So there are two questions. Dr. Adis, you may answer the question briefly because we have, I think, some more questions follow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for these important questions. So as far as the first question is concerned, in terms of the epistemological critique, I think because it is important to understand that classical ulum al-hadith sciences developed more than 1,000 years ago, and they reached the apex, let's say, in the 7th to 8th century Hijri. So more than 700 years ago. So it's a pre-modern paradigm. Yeah, it's a pre-modern paradigm that we can characterize from the perspective of today's humanities and social sciences as being strongly what I would call positivist in nature, where knowledge is not considered something that is constructed, but something that is objectively just reflects reality. In contemporary epistemology, this is known as naive realism, okay? But there are many, many problems with that kind of approach to knowledge. We know over the last 150, 200 years, post-Enlightenment hermeneutics, and there are many other additional fields of study in cultural studies, literary studies, conceptual history, indeed, modern epistemology. They have all problematized the pre-modern approaches to knowledge, not just in Islamic studies, pre-modern Islamic studies, but in religious studies, in historiography, in every form of religions, in every form of knowledge that existed in the pre-modern paradigm, okay? So what is important for us to understand is that we have to go beyond the pre-modern paradigm and sources to knowledge and supplement them with modern sources of knowledge that the humanity has together as a human, collective human endeavor. So like, for example, when it comes to Hadith studies, the conceptual history would be an important field of study that we need to study, we need to take into account and benefit from. The formation of cultural memory is also a field of study that has a lot of relevance in terms of how we can understand, or how should we understand the historical development of Hadith, the transmission of Hadith. Then literary theory, modern semiotics. There are so many new fields of knowledge that I think we as scholars today should study in order to help us understand better ulum al-hadith. Yes, there is of course a lot of benefit in studying classical paradigm, but the classical paradigm has certain limitations and they need to be supplemented by these modern sources of knowledge. In relation to the second question, as I tried to explain, that the hadith that was quoted to me comes from Kitabul Iman. So when we, it is extremely dangerous to base one opinion simply by choosing and picking one hadith or even several hadith, because every hadith has to be approached not only thematically, but it also needs to be understood, like in which part of the hadith books was it mentioned, for what purposes. So in this case, I believe the hadith has nothing to do with zina and legal issues as they are dealt with in Islamic jurisprudence. So to use this kind of hadith to justify this action is highly problematic. So, and of course, contextually, some progressive Muslim approaches say that even if a hadith is sahih, that is only the first part of the journey. Yeah, there is only the first step. It has to follow, it has to satisfy many, many additional criteria, including this idea of, is it an ethical hadith? So it is, if it is justifying an unethical practice, then even if it is sahih, it doesn't matter. It still cannot be used as a source of normative values. Yeah, and Professor Khalid Abul Fadl has written a lot on this. He has provided us with important new ethical methodological mechanisms that help us deal with these kinds of hadith. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much, Prof. Adis, for your answer. And I think the question is also very good because it's also related to our current situation in Indonesia, the case that is going around in Indonesia. Now we have quite a lot of questions for Professor Dr. Abdul Majid Hakimullah. Professor, are you still with us? I'm trying to compile all these questions, because if I just read all these questions, I know that it's too much. So I tried to compile all 5 questions that we got from the participants. We have 5 questions for Professor Abdul Majid. So we have these 5 questions. The first one is from Agusman Rahman Shah. He asked actually basically about the resources, additional resources, that whether he can access all those resources mentioned or used by Professor Abdul Majid. And then the second one is for Bapak Yusuf Rahman. The question is about, he said that thank you for enlightening us with variety of tafsir written by Iranian, mostly Shiite scholars, which unfortunately I have not access to them. Are these tafsirs written in Arabic or in Persian? If they are written in Arabic, hopefully we can access and read them. Secondly, what is the main differences according to you between the Shiite tafsir with the Sunni tafsir? Thirdly, since the theme of the conference this morning is Hadith studies, can you elaborate how the Iranian Shiite scholars view and approach to the Hadith? So it's quite a lot. And then the third question is from Rendika Gustian. It's about whether someone who has no capacity in Arabic language, whether he or she can interpret Hadith based on their knowledge. And then the 4 questions from Ali Taufan Dwi Saputra. So he has 2 questions. So the first one is about he said, we often hear that the dominant mazhab in Iran and Shia. Is there also a lot of kutub tafsir Ahlus Sunnah in Iran? And then the second one, the different interpretation of Quran in Iran also encourage conflict in society. Do different interpretation Quran in Iran also encourage conflict in society? And then the last question is from Ahmad Isnaini. The question is that, is there a methodology that is used at the present time in studying the Sunnah of the Prophet that exists in the community, or the Sunnah that lives and becomes the culture of the Iranian Muslim community? Professor Hakimullah. Hello, Professor Hakimullah. We are trying to reaching Professor Hakimullah. Hello, Professor. Are you still with us? Okay. While waiting Professor Hakimullah to probably connecting with us again, probably a committee may help to reach him again. So because there are a lot of questions for Profesor Hakimullah, mudah-mudahan beliau bisa segera bergabung lagi bersama kita. I will, while we waiting for Professor Hakimullah to get back again with us, let's move to the next questions. The next one is from Ibu Lilik Umi. Ibu Lilik. Oh, sorry. Prof Hakimullah is back. Okay, thank you so much. Ibu Lili, so I'm sorry that I have to postpone your questions. And then let's move to Professor Hakimullah. So Professor Hakimullah tried to compile, actually the question is from 5 participants, but some participant actually has more than 1 question. So if I count it, so it's about 8 or 9 questions for you. So I try to just share with you in this slide. Hopefully you can read all these questions. This is for from 5 questions, so it's up to you how you would answer all those questions, whether you want to answer all those questions one by one, or you want to answer those questions just in one question answer. And apologize that some of these questions actually written in Arabic, but since I have very limited language in Arabic, so I try to translate to English. So it's up to you if you want to answer those questions in Arabic or English. It's up to you. Professor Hakimullah.
Yes. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Should I speak English or Arabic?
It's up to you. Some of these questions actually in Arabic, some others in English.
Okay.
So it's up to you.
I will combine between.
Okay.
The first question they ask me, that's to provide them the sources of the books and also these disciplinary studies and some others which I spoke about it, and new approaches towards the tafsir of the Holy Quran and Hadith. Okay, inshallah, I will write it and I will offer it to you, and by the sources which I have it. And also we have some of these books which are translated even in Indonesian language. This is the first question. Yes, I'm at your service. And inshallah, سوف أكتب جميع المصادر لهذه المصادر التفسيرية والحديثية الجديدة وأرسل إليكم مع العناوين. I will send to you with the address of these websites, and also maybe I will send you some text if you like it, but the PDF, I can send it to you. And the second question is that, yes, the second question also is the same. They wanted to know about Hadith and the tafsir in Iran, especially in new approaches and new achievements. And another question, yes, because a lot of people don't know Arabic. Yes, majority of these books are translated in English. Even some of them are translated in Bahasa, which we can offer you. And I will write the name of these books and I will send it to you. In Indonesia, we often hear that dominate mazhab in Iran, Shia. Is there also a lot of kutub tafsir Ahl Sunnah in Iran? Of course. Please, even in my private library in my house, maybe more than 65% of my books are from Ahl Sunnah. And if you know, all Sahih Sitta are written by Iranian. Bukhari is Iranian man, is Iranian. Muslim is Iranian. Neshaburi is Iranian. All of author of Sahih Sitta are Iranian. And also, even majority of tafsir, like Tafsir Tabari, Tariq Tabari, they are Iranian. They are not Arab people. Even Zamakhshari is Iranian man. Majority of them are Iranian. Please, there is no difference, really. I swear by God, really, there is no difference between Shia and Sunni in Iran. As we have mosque for Shia, we have mosque for Sunni. We have school for Shia, for Sunni. There is no difference. There is no any differentiation between them, and there is no any conflict between them as a mazhab. Yes, maybe they have some conflict because of the land, because of, I don't know, something else, which is happening everywhere. But we have majority of our books are from the Sunni. Do different interpretation of Quran in Iran also encourage conflict in society. Actually, majority of the books which is written now, they are looking at the current issue, current time. They are not talking about the past. We are facing a lot of challenges. We are facing a lot of problems, especially in our society. So how we can solve these problems and these challenges, by the verses of the Holy Quran, because the Holy Quran is not revealed only for those people who were living in the beginning of Islam and this area of Islam 1,400 years ago. No, the Holy Quran is for everyone up to the day of judgment. My question is there. Yes, the last question by Ahmad. Yes, we have short courses which everyone can become familiar with the culture of Iranian and Muslim community in Iran, as well as the methodology of tafsir, methodology of hadith studies. We have courses, and if there are some students they want to have, we can offer them these courses in Iran for short course, whether 1 month, less or more, depends on the need of the students. Even if you are ready here, we can invite some of our lecturers from Iran to come here and deliver lecture concerning the issue.
There are Professor Hakimullah. There are additional questions here from Bapak Yusuf Rahman. Main difference about the main difference between and also could you elaborate further how Iranian how Iranian Sheikh scholar view and approach to the hadith? Can you elaborate those two issues more?
Yes, please. According to Iranian scholars, we don't have any authentic books. We don't have Sahih. We are not looking at. Yeah, we are not looking at any books as authentic books. We don't have Sahih. Why? Because this is according to this author of this books is Hadith. It's true. But maybe according to my evaluation is not true, is not Sahih. So first of all, this is the difference between Shia and Sunni was the Hadith, that we don't have any authentic books. I don't say we don't have any authentic Hadith. No, we have a lot of authentic Hadith, which we call it Hadith al-Sahih. But we don't have any authentic Hadith books, sorry. Why? Because how we say this all hadith in these books are authentic? Because this author says, for instance, Bukhari or Muslim or any other says, this is Sahih. Okay, how he says this is Sahih? According to his evaluation, according to his knowledge, according to his studies. But I'm human being also. I was offered by rational, by aqal. Almighty Allah Ta'ala gave me aqal. So I have also my understanding from the hadith, so I can criticize it. I can say that this is not authentic hadith. This is one. The second thing, which is very important, is that Iranian scholars, they use aqal as one of source of understanding of Islam. Because the sources of understanding of Islam, one is the Holy Quran. The second is Hadith. The third is Ijma'. But according to Iranian scholars, they use aqal as a one sources of the understanding Hadith and the Holy Quran. This is the second differentiation between the Iranian scholars and others. And the third one is that Iranian scholars, they approach towards Hadith by philosophical approaches. They are not textuality. They are not concentrate on the text. They use philosophical approaches. For instance, there are a lot of hadiths which are narrated from and quoted from the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. But this hadith was at that time, and that circumstance maybe is not for Indonesia for this time and for this circumstance. It was for instance, the place which the weather are hot. But here, the weather is not the same. And maybe it was only the Prophet was addressing the setting, special setting, special setting man or woman. It wasn't for the old people. So we cannot concentrate on the text only, which we call it, we are not textuality. We have to combine, but also we cannot open it as our rational and use only our rational to be rationality. No, we have to combine between text and rational, to gather and combine between rationality and textuality. This is also the third differentiation between scholars in Iran and some others. But the other also scholars also, they have these approaches.
Thank you so much, Professor. Probably this is the last question in this part. This is from Rendika Agustian. This is about actually methodological aspect, I think. So he asks, he's wondering, there are people who do not have Arabic language skills or have language skill other than Arabic, which are applied in understanding the interpretation of hadith, I guess. So this person has the power and ability to understand and interpret foreign language, non-Arabic. Can this person interpret and carry out renewal of the current tafsir? Is it okay to, if for example, I don't have any capacity in Arabic or limited capacity in Arabic, but I have a capacity to interpret, is that methodologically fine for this person to interpret Hadith or even Quran?
Actually, no. Because the Holy Quran is revealed in Arabic language, as well as our Hadith also are in Arabic language. If we want to understand the Holy Quran well, and we become expert in the tafsir of the Holy Quran, and also if we want to be expert in the Hadith, we have to know the language. It's not only knowing language as a speaking language, talking, but we have to know the literature of the language. Because of that, myself, when I wanted to know about Islamic studies and Islamic sciences, I spent only 4 years for learning literature. Like we call it sarf and nahw and al-balagha wal-fasaha, because a lot of secret in the Holy Quran. As we know, the text of the Holy Quran is miracle, is mu'jiza. The text itself, I'm not talking about the meaning. The text itself is miracle. But if someone doesn't know Arabic, he cannot distinguish between the text of the Holy Quran and the text of any other Arabic books. In the Hadith also is the same. Please, majority of the differentiation between our scholars depends on the understanding of the Hadith and on the understanding of the Holy Quran. How they understand in this way or they understand it in another way, this depends on understanding the Hadith. If someone doesn't know Arabic, how we can analyze it? Yes, I don't want to say if they don't know Arabic language, they cannot understand the Islam, they cannot understand the Holy Quran, they cannot understand the Hadith, but they can read from other people and they can analyze it by their rational. But if they want to become expert in the Holy Quran and they want to become expert in the Hadith, they have to know Arabic language properly and very well on Sarf and Nah as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Hakimullah, for a very clear answer to all those questions. Actually, there is one more additional question, but I will keep it since we have two questions here from the participants, from Ibu Lilik and Bapak Abdul Muttalib. I will give the first opportunity to Ibu Lilik to directly ask your question to any speaker we have today. Ibu Lilik.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pertanyaannya sama ke Pak Hakim ya. Abdul Majid Hakimullah. Mohon maaf saya pakai bahasa terkait dengan metode yang diberikan tadi. Ada salah satu metode yang dibilang baru tadi adalah metode maudhu'i. Ini salah satu disertasi penelitian saya. Ada metode maudhu'i tawaran dari pencetusnya adalah Syiah, yaitu Bakir Sodr, di mana beliau menyebutnya sebagai bukan istilahnya maudhu'i tapi tauhidi. Tauhidi, penyatuan yang dimaksud beliau adalah penyatuan dari teks dan konteks, yaitu fasir itu tidak boleh, dia menafsirkan tidak boleh lepas dari perkembangan yang ada atau kegelisahan masyarakat setempat. Nah ini pertanyaan pertama adalah Bakir Sodr sudah tokoh udah lama udah tidak ada dan beliau belum sampai sebelumnya karena filosof. Untuk khusus Al-Quran hanya Al-Madrasah Al-Quraniyah, kemudian An-Sunnah Tarihiyah. Yang saya tanyakan apakah warisan intelektual terkait dengan tafsir, bukannya filsafat ya, dari tokoh Syiah ini ada dilanjutkan oleh tokoh tafsir yang kontemporer gitu. Untuk melanjutkan, bagi saya teori beliau sangat-sangat progresif ya, sehingga metode maudhu'i tidak dipandang sebelah mata karena benar-benar sebagai metode yang untuk menghidupkan, mendialogkan antara teks dengan kontekstual. Yang kedua, saya juga alhamdulillah pernah ke penelitian tahfidz ke Iran itu dan menemukan di sana di Qum banyak sekali memang sudah mentradisi hafidz ya, hafidhul Quran mulai kecil ya, mulai kecil. Pertanyaan saya adalah apakah ada pembinaan berikutnya, istilahnya saya gabungkan dengan yang Bakir Sodr tadi, karena bagi Bakir Sodr itu jangan hanya sekedar menghafal, jangan sekedar hanya meneliti teks, tetapi itu digabung. Nah, apakah di Iran ditemukan ada pembinaan lanjutan? Saya lihat hafidnya betul-betul mutqin ya, hafalannya bagus-bagus mulai kecil. Apakah mereka ada pembinaan lanjutan sebuah lembaga khusus atau apa itu bentuknya, sehingga intelektual dia tidak hanya sebagai penghafal tetapi juga sebagai peneliti dan pemerhati perkembangan lingkungan, sehingga hafalannya hidup, itu tidak pasif. Saya kira itu, kalau memang ada nanti saya ke Iran lagi. Terima kasih. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bu Lilik. I've recorded the question. Saya sudah mencatat dua pertanyaannya. The next one, Bapak Abdul Muttalib. Bapak, Dipersilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Ya, I'm very grateful to hear the speech from our friend from Iran, And the speaker from Iran, what is the name, Professor Abdul Majid, that you say that there is no gap between Sunni and Shi'i in Iran. In reality, there is always, such as there is at least 52 Sunni mosques destroyed by Iranian government. And this happened after Islamic Revolution. And the second one, if you go to the Tafsir Shi'i and Tafsir Sunni, starting from which is very, very different, even big gap, which can create a problem and conflict. For example, if we read the Tafsir Al-Tabaksi, we like it because we learn a lot more Mu'tazili from his Tafsir. At the beginning, I think he is moderate Shi'i. But after I read the book Al-Ihtizazat by him, 2 volumes, in volume 1, he said that Man awwala bay'a Abu Bakar huwa iblis la'na'ullah. How come this kind of theology inserted in the Hadith Kulaini and then copied by Tabaksi? And how come this kind of theology, this kind of belief, this kind of conviction can make us live together in peaceful? And in the book of Khomeini 2, the old version, in the Kashful Asrar, he said a lot of nasty things to Abu Bakr and Usman, and Abu Bakr and Umar bin Khattab. And only this my question, and I expect, do you have new theology to make our takrib approach between Sunni and Shi'i come true? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bapak Abdul Muttalib, for your questions. So these 2 questions and 1 more question on the chat box, all are directed to Professor Hakimullah. So I will start from a question from Ibu Lilik. So Ibu Lilik has 2 questions. So the first one is that Ibu Lilik mentioned about the tafsir methodology developed by Bakr Sadr, Shiite scholar, Bakir Sadr, sorry. The question is that, is there any contemporary Iranian or Shiite scholars that continue the methods developed by Bakir Sadr? If there is any, she wants to learn more. And then the second question is that the methods from Bakir Sadr is Tauhidi, which is combined between text and context. And the second question is Ibu Lili also has learned that in Iran, there are a lot of kids in Iran learn or educate to be Hafiz, so learning Quran and also memorize Quran. The question is that, is there any further education methods after this Hafiz level? For instance, whether those kids teach in the aspect of social or any general thought about society, so that they are not only become a Hafiz, but also understand their society and can analyze society from their intellectual perspective. That's 2 questions from Ibu Lilik, and then after that, you can also answer the question from Bapak Abdul Muttalib. Professor Hakimullah?
Yes, okay, thank you very much for your question. First, I will go to Ustad Abdul Muttalib. Thank you very much for raising this question. First of all, I would like to inform you that there is no any conflict between Shia and Sunni in Iran. And what you said is not true. This is coming from politicians, and especially those people who want to bring the differentiation between Sunni and Shia, who wants to bring the conflict between Islam, Muslim Ummah. And they say, yes, Iranian, they do so and so and so. But you cannot get even single mosque which is destroyed in Iran. Yes, maybe it will happen, whether from Sunni side or Shia side. They build mosque in the not proper way, or it's not the land which belongs to them, in the general land. It should be destroyed. For instance, in the beach of the river, and which, if the flood is coming, spoil everything. It was built some mosques, even in Shia side. And the mayor, they come, and the governor, they destroy it. But this doesn't matter. It belongs to Sunni or belongs to the Shia. Even if you look at the, if you want, I will send to you, look at the mosques in Sunni sites and Sunnis area and compare it to mosque in Shiite area. Each 400 Sunnis has one mosque. But if 40,000 Shia has only one mosque, how we can say? And this mosques, the Sunnis mosque before Islamic Revolution only were less than 1,000 mosques. Now they have more than 13,000 mosques. Even they call it Hawza Elmiya, which is seminaries, or you say Posantaran. They have a lot of Posantarans, and they have member of the parliament. Some of them ambassadors, some of them ministers, some of them they have. Please, wallahi, there is no any difference between Sunni and Iran. No one is treated as a Shia or treated as a Sunni. All is propaganda from CIA, from Mossad, or sometimes from some Arab countries, which they want to bring difficulty and create problems between Muslims countries. I'm asking you, is Syria was, which we don't want to go to the politics because here is academic meeting, but Syria is what Sunni people, what they did with. Afghanistan is Sunni country, Syria, Afghanistan, and others. Doesn't matter, but you see what they did. This is one. Secondly, concerning what you said, yes, I'm talking about the tafsir, but the hadith which you quoted, maybe it's happened, but it's not authentic hadith. And we don't say that all ulama and scholars who do tafsir of the Holy Quran, they are not making mistake. They have mistake. And maybe they bring some non-authentic hadith, which maybe they bring it. But we are talking the two approaches. We are talking towards the approaches. What is the methods? What is the approaches? Yes, this is the method, which I talk about the methods in for the tafsir and for the hadith, regarding the tafsir and regarding the hadith. But never, ever I say or I complain that all mufassirin and all scholars are not making mistake. Yes. And never, ever say whatever is in Kafi is Sahih and authentic hadith. The difference between Shia and Sunni is this point. Shia don't have any authentic book. Which book they have it? There are a lot of authentic hadith on it, and there are a lot of unauthentic hadith. As you know, from some imams of Shia is narrated, and it has been said that they said, Fulanun dassa fi kutubi alaf min al ahadith. He created a lot of unauthentic hadith, which I never, and my fathers never, they said it, but they wrote it from themselves. This is what I want. And concerning the memorizing of the Holy Quran, which is very important, please, in Iran, after Islamic Revolution of Iran, we spend a lot to the Holy Quran. First of all, we created a lot of sections in the Ministry of Education. Ministry of Higher Education, and Ministry of Culture and Information, and in some other ministries. In all schools, from the primary schools, Form 1 up to Form 6, all students, they have to know how they should read the Holy Quran, and they have to know the meaning of the Holy Quran. You know, the language is not Arabic language. And all students, they have to know the meaning of the Holy Quran. This is. Secondly, we created and we established a lot of schools, which we call it Darul Quran. Darul Quran, which established. During 1 year, during only 1 year, they memorized the Holy Quran and whole Quran. And if you ask them from the page, they will inform you from the which page, which kalima in the first page, in the second page, and maybe you are familiar with this Iranian child. They memorized the Holy Quran. During 1 year only, they memorized the Holy Quran. And after that, they continue their education in the schools. And those people who memorize the Holy Quran, they have a lot of prizes. For instance, they can go to the university without entrance exam. They have monthly salary. They have a lot of advantages regarding those people who doesn't memorize the Holy Quran. Because of that, we have millions of the memorizer of the Holy Quran. But what I want to concentrate on it is that they memorize the Holy Quran only in 1 year or less than 1 year. They have a lot of methodology by which they can memorize it. Even we have child 3 years old, they memorize the Holy Quran. 3 years old, 7 years old, 4 years old, they memorize the Holy Quran by the meaning. Is not only memorizing the Quran and they don't know what is going on. And we are ready to share our experiences with some our brothers, with some our Darul Quran, with some Yayasans, Muassasa, and some universities. Even in the universities, for instance, in different courses and different majors, all students, even in dentistry, even in medical, the students, they have to read studies of the Holy Quran and the Quranic sciences, as well as Hadith. It's not only for those people who are studying Islamic studies. Even in dentistry, in chemistry, in physics, in nuclear weapons also, they have to know the Holy Quran, because this is our Quran from Almighty Allah.
And
Okay.
one more
Can
question.
Wait, not question, just my comment. Yes, your answer is somehow apology. You say there is no such thing happening in Iran. In fact, it is a reality that the Sunni mosques get destroyed, you know, and also the tradition of condemning Sahaba continue, spoken in YouTube by many Ayatollah of Iran. Even in Google, we hear how they say Aisha is Muqtada, Ahlul
Can
Zina.
you mention one name of one Ayatollah who in curse and land of Aisha? This
There is
is
one Ayatollah.
one person. Please, my brother.
Ayatollah.
One person, but let me tell you. One person, his name is Yasser Habib. Okay? Who is Yasser Habib? Yasser Habib is man of intelligence service of England. Yasser Habib is Kuwaiti man. He was present in Kuwait for all his life. But the MI6 brought him out from prison in Kuwait, and he gave him British nationality, provide him, I was in London, provide him by very big house, provide him by channel which is named Fadak. For what? For cursing Aisha, for writing books about Aisha. This is in one side. Another side, the Beritin as well, they establish another channel which is named is Kalima. They cursing Shia. Why? Because they want to bring the conflict between Shia and Sunni. By that, they can get our power and they can bring the friendship between Ummah. While always we are insisting on al-wahda al-islamiyya, al-ummah al-islamiyya. If you want, I have book. It is translated in Bahasa language. I have book from all Maraji, from all Ayatullahs, which they said it is haram, it is forbidden to anyone to curse any Sahaba, to curse any companion of the Prophet, and to say any bad to the companion of the prophets. But my brother, don't listen only to one side, which from some MI6, from Britain, which they say, Farriq Tasod, the friendship, the governor. Yes.
Okay, I think we have to
Okay,
move on.
wait a moment. What you say is still apology. In fact, I want your true testimony. This thing happened. I already read many Ayatollah, Ayatollah fatwa that Aisha is not Jinnah, but she is against Ali.
Never
so,
any fatwa, never, ever. Bring one fatwa from Ayatollah. I will send you, please, I will send you book which from Ayatollah they said it is forbidden, it is haram to curse al-Mu'minin Aisha, to curse any Sunni, and to say any bad thing to any companion of the Prophet. Those people who are talking, they are intelligence service of MI6.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have to move on to the next, because we have to get back to the track of our conference. That is a topic about the Quran and Hadith, and we still have some questions. And again, we are also running out of time. We have still actually 2 questions, and this is the last question probably for Professor Hakimullah. This is the question from Ibu Lilik. So Professor Hakimullah, sorry, this is because there are a lot of questions for you. So this is probably the last one. So the question is there any contemporary scholars that continue the intellectual legacy of Bakir Sadr regarding his approach in the tafsir, called the method is the Tauhidi or Maudui. So is there any contemporary scholars that continue to develop that approach developed by Bakir Sadr? Probably just a short answer.
Yes. Because as we know, one of our elites is Shaheed Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Sad, who was killed and martyred by Saddam Hussein in Iraq in 3 decades before. And he brought a lot of new nazariya, ara, and approaches, whether in fiqh jurisprudence, or in usul al-fiqh, principles of jurisprudence, or in tafsir, even in theology, in kalam, even in economic, Islamic economic, and in philosophy, because he wrote Islamic economy, iqtisaduna, which is translated in English. I don't know, is it translated in Bahasa in Indonesia or not, but Islamic economic. Falsafatuna is our philosophy, and Al-Bankul Rabawi fil Islam. He wrote in economic, and he had a lot of books. Yes, up to some maybe last year, there was a scholar in Iran, which his name was Misbah Yazdi. He's a philosopher. He was student of Allama Tabatabai, and he's well known in Western universities. He was following the method of Shahid Saad, and he wrote a lot of books. But concerning the Holy Quran, he has books by name Ma'arif al-Quran. I don't know whether it's translated in English or not. In English, yes, it's translated, but in Bahasa, one of it is translated recently, I heard. And Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli also, although has some different approaches, but he is very, very, very close to the method of Shahid Sadr. As well as there are some students of Shahid Sadr which are living whether in Iraq or in Iran. They are following also the method of Shahid Sadr. And I can say Shahid Saad was very elite, and he brought a lot of new idea and new concepts in Islamic studies. But there are some other scholars now are living in the contemporary time, and they have new approaches, new concept concerning the Islamic studies. Like now at the moment, because up to last year, Misbah Yazdi, he unfortunately is less than 1 year. Last year, he passed away, whether by corona or he passed away. But at the moment, Jawadi Amuli also, he continues the same, and he wrote one book in tafsir. 70 volumes up to now is published, but if it's become completed, I don't know how many volumes it will be, but now it's 70 volumes. I saw 70 volumes.
Thank you so much, Professor Akimullah, for your answer. I hope that answer also useful for Ibu Lili. And this is the last question, and the last question is directed to Ibu Lisfa. The question is also from Ibu Lilik. The question for Ibu Lisfa, pertanyaannya adalah di mana peran mahasiswa hadis dalam digitalisasi hadis? Mahasiswa hadis hanya berperan dalam sumbangsi materi, ataukah mereka juga berperan terkait skill pembuatan aplikasi dan segala yang terkait kelengkapan aplikasi tersebut, sehingga akan tampak integrate keterampilan atau keahliannya. Untuk Ibu Lisfa, pertanyaan.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Acep. Saya tanggapi ya. Terima kasih Bu Lili atas pertanyaannya. Pengalaman saya menghadapi mahasiswa ilmu hadis ini ya, prodi ilmu hadis itu ternyata punya berbagai skill ya mereka, apalagi anak-anak milenial sekarang ya. Mereka untuk teknologi itu bahkan katakanlah lebih melek dari generasi kolonial gitu ya. Jadi beberapa yang memiliki skill itu sebenarnya bisa diarahkan untuk misalnya saya mengusulkan misalnya di Fakultas Sosiologi UIN Jakarta ini bisa alternatif untuk tugas akhirnya dengan pembuatan aplikasi hadis gitu ya, yang setara dengan skripsi, tapi tentu ada narasinya dulu gitu ya untuk proses pembuatannya itu. Artinya sebenarnya ini bisa dipadukan ya, bisa diintegrasikan karena ini lebih ke arah skill sebenarnya kalau bicara tentang pembuatan aplikasi ya. Seperti yang santri-santri dari Prodi Ilmu Hadis dari berbagai PTKI di Indonesia yang santren di PKH Cinagara Bogor itu, mereka memang dibimbing ya oleh tim dari Pusat Kajian Hadis ini, tapi skillnya sudah ada. Sehingga dengan bakat skill yang sudah ada ini tinggal diasah dan kemudian diarahkan untuk membuat aplikasi itu, dan jadilah 50 aplikasi hadis buatan mahasiswa ilmu hadis Indonesia. Itu diantara hasilnya. Jadi menurut saya tidak mesti harus mendalami teknologi lagi ya. Tapi secara teori sih barangkali mungkin kalau bicaranya secara teori tentunya perlu dengan ilmu teknologi yang bisa diintegrasikan dengan Fakultas Sains dan Teknologi ya. Tapi kalau hanya sekedar untuk membuat aplikasi hadis itu lebih simpel sebenarnya. Begitu barangkali Pak Acep. Terima kasih Bu Lili. Ya.
Oke, terima kasih banyak Ibu Liswa atas jawabannya. Thank you so much. And I think we are arriving in the end of our webinar. It's exactly 3 hours. So we started our webinar session in 9:30, and now we see our watch, it's already 12:30. So we've learned a lot from this discussion. So just before we close this session, if I can conclude, just make a brief summary, just again to remind all the participants about what we have learned. Although you, each of you probably have also written your own conclusion. So from me, so we've learned a lot from all the 4 distinguished speakers about, first of all, from Dr. Adis about the new approach in studying Hadith named contextual progressive approach, while he also introduced us with the current debates in the studying Hadith. That's really will be useful, I think, for those who studying Hadith, especially we in Indonesia and those in many other countries too. And then from Professor Hakimullah, we've learned about the how the scholar and ulama in Iran also studying Hadith, the breakthrough they made in studying Hadith, and he also, by responding to many questions in this webinar, also provide us with so many information, whether it's about the methodology, but also about the current development about how Quran and Hadith studied by people, including children in Iran. And also the presentation or talk from Ibu Liswa, talk about digitalisasi Hadith. This is a very interesting presentation too. Ibu Liswa shared with us about the current the development of digitalisasi Hadith from early 2000, dari awal tahun 2000-an, mulai dari kemunculan many encyclopedia available in many languages, those who quite complex, but then later even more simple, so many people can learn the Hadith, can directly access the Hadith, even for the common people, or common society like me probably. And the 4th presentation from Bapak Abdul Hakim is about common link theory in studying Hadith. It's also very interesting, even though it's quite brief, but it's so very strong. And I think that will make also our webinar today even more fruitful and beneficial for all the participants. I think all those summary from all the speakers, I hope that really make you really learn or even get motivated. Probably some of the participants here are students from Quran and Hadith studies. So I hope that all the talks from speakers today also motivate you to learn even more in studying Quran and Hadith. Before I close, there are some information here. So from the committee that in 1:30 dalam 1 jam ke depan pada pukul 1:30 akan dimulai panel session dari konferensi ini. Panitia sudah membagikan beberapa linknya untuk setiap kelompok. Jadi link-linknya dapat diakses di link Zoom. Jadi supaya tidak lupa, you can just copy all those link into your computer. So in case you need it, you can just access those link to join the next session of this conference. So last, I will thank you again. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much for all the distinguished speakers. Dr. Adis from Brisbane, thank you so much for sharing with us your knowledge, and also Professor Hakimullah. Thank you so much, Professor, for your also very clear explanation about many issues in the Hadith studies and your comparative perspective between Iran and Indonesia. That's really, I learned a lot, and I believe that all participants here also learned a lot from you. And Ibu Liswa, thank you again for a very inspiring presentation about digitalisasi Hadith, and also for Dr. Abdul Hakim. Bapak, terima kasih banyak for your share with us about the common link theory in studying Hadith. Thank you for our participants, for the committee. So that's all from me. So I think we still have the next session, and we still have the another webinar tomorrow. So just I will be waiting for you all to join with the conference in the second day. Thank you so much for me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jaket lah.